I want to welcome you to the Retro Rogues Live. Please pay attention to our warning graphic. It states that the Retro Rogues Live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised. Again, I want to welcome you to the show. My name is Dave Beatty. I am one of your hosts. For nearly the last 30 years, I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer. Worked on a lot of fun things that some people have heard of, such things as Justice League of America, Batman Incorporated, and for tonight, we'll say Flashpoint, Wonder Woman. But enough about that. My big current fascination is actually Kirby Tees. You visit kirbytees.com, see more of the fun things that we've got going on, as well as potentially pick up a shirt to help support what we've got going on here at the Retro Rogues Live. I want to welcome back my co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks hopefully watching or listening at home some of the fun things that you have worked on as a creative professional.
Yes, hello everyone. I am Eric Alexander, also known as Bass God 14. That's Bass God 14, not Bass God 14. That's Bass God 14, like a bass guitar. And I actually have some sad news tonight. My father actually passed away last week, and we actually were involved with quite a few different creative endeavors. In fact, that's pretty much the way that I ended up meeting Dave in the first place, is because we were involved with several comic books. So among some of the credits that I had with my father were a couple different short stories and comic books that I wrote. And he would help in terms of with some of the animation work that he actually did. We did some screenshots on a book. And that book was actually called the Insomniacs Comics Showcase. And it had two different stories in it. And one of them was one called Mr. Hero Man. And Mr. Hero Man was actually based on my dad. And here's a couple images from the book over here. I was actually very proud of how the artwork came out. We actually got a very inexperienced artist named Efren Crespo to do it. And he did a fantastic job. He was a local student at the time. That's Mr. Hero Man right there. And I was actually the writer on that story. Efren did the artwork. My father was the inspiration. In fact, when we first went to San Diego Comic-Con to promote the company that I had with my roommate at the time called Insomniacs Comics. My dad actually dressed up as Mr. Hero Man for San Diego Comic-Con. That was in 1999, I believe. And that was our first booth. That was my first experience at San Diego Comic-Con. My dad dressed up as Mr. Hero Man, which was a character that was absolutely based on him. Basically, what I did was I took elements of his life and exaggerated them and made him into a superhero. And this is my dad's creation. He actually made this character up when I was a little boy. And he'd always wanted to do it as a video game. It's called The Adventures of Lieutenant Tuffy. Now, these are screenshots from a little animation that my dad did. My dad was basically like an amateur animator. And he actually took screenshots from the little animation that he made. And then we went ahead and we put, obviously the bubbles and stuff and made it into a little comic book called The Adventures of Lieutenant Tuffy. And I actually wrote the story. I'm actually planning on my YouTube to upload that short film so that if folks want to check it out, they can check it out on my YouTube at Bass God 14. Again, that's The Adventures of Lieutenant Tuffy. Like I said, it was always meant for my dad. He wanted to do a video game on it. He never really got around to doing it, but we did do the story at one point. So wanted to dedicate it the show. Dave said that would be okay. So we are dedicating the show to my dad, and I'll use his character name, Mr. Hero Man, because of course he very much was my hero. And then we do have some folks in the Rogues Gallery in the house. Jane says, "Hey guys, it's good to see you." And then Bobby mentions that he loved the intro countdown. Hello, Dave and the Rogues. And he mentioned sorry for my loss. I appreciate that, Bobby. And Jane also said that. So appreciate you both chiming in, and hopefully we'll be able to still have a fun show for you. Unfortunately, we are still reviewing our text, so we'll see how that goes. But anyway, that's the news that I have. And again, I just want to dedicate the show to my dad.
And I feel like it is a fitting dedication for a number of reasons. I enjoyed the conversations I got to have with your dad. He was big into, CGI and computer animation, which I think I know some of the people in the Rogues Gallery would be aware of that. I think some people familiar with my comics work are aware of that, and we shared that in common, and as well as the love of comics and great storytelling. And I always enjoyed the time I got to actually speak with your dad. It was always fun and entertaining, and he was such an interesting person. And yeah, I just remember every time I always saw your dad, it was just kind of fun to get to talk to him too, because he was just in a lot of the same stuff that we were into, and I thought that was really kind of cool. Kind of the same way that my mom is into a lot of the same stuff and introduced me to a lot of the things that I love. That was just always a really fun thing. So it's a fitting thing that we dedicate this episode to Mr. Hero Man. So
Thank you.
yeah, that's a very apt label. So very cool. And again, my condolences, Eric. I've expressed that to you personally. Obviously off the show, off air, off the show. Yeah, but let's focus on the good things. And the two of you created some fun stuff together. I know I have my issue of Lieutenant Tuffy still in my collection. And I just remembered the conversations I had with him about it. I think I can't remember if he had it. No, he didn't. For some reason, I seem to think I remember seeing the Mr. Hero Man outfit, but maybe I'm confused. Maybe you just showed me a picture of it at some time, because I remember seeing that, but I don't think he actually wore that outfit at Phoenix Con or not.
I know he wore it several years at San Diego.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if you ever wore it at any of the Phoenix stuff, but you were there a couple of the years we were there for San Diego as well, and I don't know if he wore it at any of those times.
Maybe.
Or not. I can't remember.
Maybe that's why it seems so familiar to me, because I seem to remember him wearing the costume, and maybe that's why. Maybe he was wearing it at San Diego.
And sometimes he would, instead of wearing the whole thing, he would just wear the mask with the fedora. He did that.
Okay, yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. Well, very cool. So do we want to go ahead and get into the first review for this evening?
I guess we have to.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to start, obviously, at the top of the show. We're in the process of reviewing every episode of the Lower Decks. And this was episode 4. I think wasn't it titled Moist Vessel or something like that? Or maybe I'm confused.
That sounds about right. In fact, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yep. Moist Vessel. That's correct. Moist Vessel.
Okay. Yeah. So this was episode 4 of Lower Decks. Obviously, you can watch this on CBS All Access. And we're just going to talk about our initial impressions of this particular episode. It was okay. I didn't laugh again. I think I liked this episode better than the last episode. But I didn't have any laughs this episode. It did feel like a chore watching this one. And my general impressions are I really don't like how they're portraying the bridge crew, like the command crew, which is interesting because the last episode I talked about how I was surprised that I liked the second in command as much as I did, because it came across kind of Kirk-like, and I thought that was kind of fun. And I liked the fact that he wasn't a buffoon. And then in this one, we have another sort of example of where the bridge crew, of the Cerritos is just not very good at their job. And then we have a second ship where they're obviously not very good at their job either. And it always annoys me when you're talking about CGI animation. Couldn't they create another ship? Like why is it in this new era of Star Trek, every Federation ship except for the movies has to look the same? I complained about it during Picard because I didn't like it. And then we get a new ship in this. It's the same make and model as a Cerritos. It's like the same thing. It's like, couldn't you give us like a fun, sort of Constitution type class looking ship? You could have given us like a version of like a Federation tug, like the Kelvin from the movies. Like there's so many different iterations of Star Trek ships. You could have given us an upgraded version of like the Stargazer or like anything. But we're just going to take the same CGI model, looks like, of the Cerritos with slightly changed things, and it's just going to be the same thing. I felt like that was a cop-out. I'm going to call it out right now. I did not like that. So my overall impressions of this episode, better than the last one, but a return to form from the things that I don't like about the current iterations of Star Trek. Same looking ship, which bothers me, and then the fact that the bridge crew seems to be almost incompetent, and I don't enjoy that. I didn't hate this episode, but I didn't love it either. That's my initial reaction. What were your initial reactions, Eric?
Well, I've said it before, and it's a theme that I have to constantly return to when I talk about Lower Decks, is the ultimate question is, can you do a Star Trek parody that is actually Star Trek, officially Star Trek? We're going to be talking about the Orville comic book later, and a lot of people say, well, that is the actual official Star Trek parody, if you will, because a lot of people consider that more Star Trek than a lot of what New Trek is right now. But the Orville has an advantage in being actual parody, actual satire, not being official Star Trek. They can get away with some things because they don't have to worry about things like canon. They don't have to worry about what was established from shows before. They can literally cherry pick what they want. And in Star Trek Lower Decks, they are attempting to do the same thing. The creators of this show are cherry picking the things that they want to cherry pick. It gets to me because I'll see people that are real big proponents of the show, and they'll say things like, oh, did you catch that line about Moriarty? Oh, did you catch that line about Abraham Lincoln? As if that's supposed to make everything better, and this is actual real Star Trek. I'm telling you, folks, that's just not, in my opinion, that's just not correct. Star Trek Lower Decks has all sorts of Easter eggs and things like that try to pretend to make it like it's Trek. But the fact of the matter is, it is not Trek. It is a Trek parody. It is Trek satire. And yet it wants to use the name Star Trek. And I really think this show would have worked a lot better if they just got rid of Star Trek. And if instead they had just made Lower Decks or whatever they wanted to call it. And not try to make it, officially Star Trek at all, because this show makes fun of Star Trek, and it's making fun of you. If you are a Star Trek fan, if you are a Trekkie, this show is making fun of you. The way this show episode starts out, they're doing a classic mission briefing scene, okay? That's a big staple of Star Trek, because that lets the viewer know what the heck is going on. It's a very easy setup in Star Trek to do like the mission log or to do a mission briefing at the beginning of the episode. So we know exactly what's going on. We know what the problem is. We know what it is that they're doing. And so everything is very well set up. In that first scene, we have our Mary Sue once again in that scene of the briefing. The briefing I actually was finding interesting. This is what kills me. I actually thought the setup was interesting. I actually saw there was a new design in this. There was a new design for a generation ship, an ancient alien generation ship. And I actually thought the design was interesting. I thought the whole premise was interesting of what was going on this ship, and the fact that, now the Federation had found it thousands of years later, and it apparently never made it to its destination. It was like a classic Trek setup that was fascinating to me. Miss Mary Sue comes in the middle of the briefing, starts yawning. This is boring. This is so stupid. Folks, that's directed at you. If you are a Trekkie and you like Star Trek and you like that kind of stuff, they are making fun of you because they're saying, isn't that stuff so boring? Isn't that stuff so stupid? That's the stuff we all hate about Star Trek, right? Because it's so boring. It's so cerebral. Gosh, why can't it be more like Star Wars? Because yawn, yawn, yawn. And that, to me, sums up how Star Trek Lower Decks treats Star Trek and why I have such a huge problem with this show.
Well, and I didn't enjoy the setup either. Like, I thought the setup was interesting with the briefing, and we had a Tellarite captain. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like they kind of gave us this interesting sort of situation. And I was trying to this is the sad part. I was paying attention to the briefing because like you said, it's a classic Star Trek setup, and I'm paying attention to the briefing. And I am also annoyed with our ensign who couldn't care less, who's yawning, who's throwing the data pads down on the table. I'm just like, okay, this isn't funny. This is just annoying. I'm genuinely curious about, like, I was like, wow, this is an interesting premise. You know, it's a classic Trek premise. This is kind of fun, and why is she being so annoying? That's what I kept, because it wasn't funny. It was just
Don't you
annoying.
think that is directed at us as fans? And gosh, you know, isn't this so stupid? This whole thing that they do in Star Trek, isn't it so dumb? You know, this mission briefing nonsense. Isn't it so boring? Let's just get rid of that. Let's not do that anymore in Star Trek, because that sucks. It's so boring, you know? You didn't get that feeling?
I mean, I did, but I was trying to look past that because I don't, like I said, I don't want to hate the show. But yeah, I mean, I pretty much got what they were dishing, and I didn't like it. But at the same point too, that's the thing that's kind of weird about this show. It sets up something, like when it just tries to just be Star Trek and not be funny. Like I would be into it. Like if this was just a Star Trek animated show and it was not trying to be funny, I think for me it would be more entertaining, because I like the mission briefing, I like the setup, I like the new, you know, the generation ship, like all this stuff was interesting, but it was like the humor again. I like the first episode I thought had some funny guffaw kind of moments, and I enjoyed it. And it seems like every episode we go in, like I said, I didn't dislike this one as much as the last one. And I didn't hate it. That's the thing that's weird. When it's just being Star Trek and not trying to be funny, I find it entertaining. But it's like when it was trying to be funny, I didn't think it was very funny. The only time I laughed was there was a bit that they did in the preview for the next episode that I actually burst out laughing at, because I thought that was kind of funny. You know, but yeah, my overall impressions of this episode is like when it's being Star Trek, I'm enjoying it, and when it's trying to be funny, it didn't work for me.
See, but the irony is that I think when it tries to be Star Trek, they're making fun of that. They're actually saying that's stupid. Like when they're actually trying to be Trek, they're trying to show how dumb that is and how boring it is and how it just doesn't work. That's what I feel like.
Right. Well, see, and I would just look at it. I look at it like this. It just, in my opinion, when it's just trying to be Trek, I didn't feel like, because that's the thing. When it's trying to be funny, that's when it was insulting. When they were just doing the setup, I thought that was interesting. You know, even some of the stuff they were doing with, well, we'll have to say that for the spoilers, but that's my overall impression is just, you know, generally speaking, when the show is trying to be Star Trek, because that's the thing I like about the last one, you know, when it's just trying to be Star Trek and it's not trying to be funny, I'm enjoying it. And then when it's trying to be funny, it is kind of insulting and at times, and then other times it just doesn't work. Like, well, we'll have to say it for the spoilers. I have some things I want to talk about. We have to get into the spoilers for that. So my overall impression, and I see what you're saying, Eric. My overall impression of this episode was, and I think that's my total review for this episode. When it's just being Star Trek, I'm being entertained and I'm enjoying what I'm seeing. And then when it's trying to be funny, I don't like it because it's not funny.
That's interesting. You know, I think I agree with you there. One thing I do want to point out, Dave, have you seen any of the after show, the Ready Room, any of those episodes?
Is it hosted by Will Wheaton?
Yeah.
No.
So
I got enough of that with Picard. I don't want to watch any more of that.
So I watched the first one. Okay. And the first one was interesting because the showrunner was there and the art director was there. The two people that probably have the most input in what we actually see on screen, right? And one of the things they said was that they wanted this show to be kind of different in the sense that the traditional B story from a Next Gen episode would be like the primary focus of this show. Okay. They're not doing that. That's not what they're doing. Every time something happens and there's some sort of calamity on the ship, okay, that's literally like putting the ship in danger, everybody might die. That's clearly would be the A story in a typical Next Gen episode, right? That's the A story in this one too. They usually have a B story going on as well. There's a silly B story in this episode, And there's usually a B episode, actually usually involving either the cyborg or the Orion girl. That seems to always be them. They never get to be the star of the show. They always get to be the B. So it's kind of funny. It's like even their own convention that they were promoting and I assume pitched the show on, they're not doing that because it's always about, I'm just call her the Mary Sue. She always saves the day. That's what's going to happen. She's always going to be the one that's at the forefront of whatever's happening. And we usually do get some sort of a silly B story where we can maybe have a little fun with it because it is supposed to be stupid and silly. But what they said on Ready Room was that's supposed to be the main story. But they're not doing that. If they actually did that, if they actually had these goofy sort of junior officers who were always off doing something silly in the middle of a calamity and didn't have anything really to do with helping what actually, was destroying the ship, and it was the bridge crew who always ended up, saving them and fixing it and stuff like that, that would be funny. I think that could work. You know what I mean? If you showed these sort of wacky junior officers who aren't really that good at their job, and they're always doing something silly, like they're going out on a date or they're trying to make a new friend or they're just doing something stupid, and they're always doing something silly, but the bridge crew is always kind of in the background actually saving their butts. I think that could actually be funny and that could work. But instead, that's not what we have. It's like it's trying to do too many things at the same time. Instead of just saying, okay, well, we've got one set of characters that can be zany and wacky. You actually talked about this last episode. They could have done that. They could have made the bridge crew real serious and good at their job and make the lower decks people all wacky and zany and kind of incompetent. You know what I mean? And then you would have a contrast to bounce things back and forth off of. Instead, every episode, spoiler alert, Ensign Mary Sue is going to fix everything. I mean, literally, that's what's happening like every episode. So to me, the real problem there also is, what's going to happen. We had one little shock last episode that we talked about that they actually showed the second officer actually did do something, kind of heroic and actually did fix things. But he was the one who messed it up in the first place. If you recall that episode, he was the one that didn't listen to Ensign Mary Sue because she's always right. And if he had just listened to her, none of that would have happened in the first place. So at least they let him fix his own mess. But the fact of the matter was he created that mess in the first place. And the captain also created that mess because she was overworking everybody, and that's part of the reason that the mistake happened, where they had the wrong trinket. That was part of the story because she was doing that thing where she was micromanaging everybody. And so I don't know. It's just, to me, it's like, I think that it's one of those things where, I think there's potential where they could have done something really interesting and fun and made like a true sort of, Star Trek comedy. But instead, what they have made is a Star Trek satire. It's a Star Trek farce.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And and I guess that's the thing. The deal with this episode for me, where it falls flat, is the fact that tonally it's just all over the place. It's not like the comedy is with the lower decks crew. The comedy is supposed to be the outlandishness, apparently, of the situation. And the core of the outlandish situation, pretty much every episode so far, is something going on with the bridge crew. And the reason it gets out of hand is basically because the bridge crew, they just really suck at what they do.
Right.
And this is the first episode where, in all honesty, Eric, calling back to something that you said earlier, how are they the bridge crew? If they're this incompetent, how are they even still in Starfleet? I mean, and how are they in command of, a Federation starship? I mean, if they, if this bridge crew and the lower decks, if we were following them and they're like sort of in a reclassified, overworked, Klingon garbage scow, and then it kind of like, oh, okay, all right, I get it, but I don't understand why they're in command of Federation starship. And in all honesty,
I can tell you why I think they are. I can tell you why. Because I think the writers and the creators of this show think Starfleet is stupid, and therefore it makes sense that their command crew is stupid. They think the whole construct is just dumb. That's what they're saying to me every time I watch this, that they think the whole construct of Starfleet is just dumb. It's a dumb idea.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm not prepared to go there just yet, but I can see what you're saying. Just because
the writing's on the wall.
I still want to believe that these people don't hate Star Trek, but it is starting to feel like maybe that's the case. I hate to say that because with this episode, like I said, I honestly thought that with the last episode we were going to turn the corner, and it was going to turn out that the bridge crew is actually pretty competent at what they do, for the most part. But in this episode, we saw yet again another captain who has got no business being in charge of a ship. And I think the only person potentially as bad as her is the Tellarite. The Tellarite captain of the other ship also should not be in command of a Federation starship. I mean, we saw starship captains make horrible choices in the original series that seemed more responsible than these two. And I'm like, I don't get it. So,
well, let's get into those spoilers, because
all right.
I thought the entire construct of how the Tellarite captain screws up was just dumb. It didn't make any sense. And it's like, how would that even happen? How would this organic material that's been stored inside a ship and is clearly designed to be used to, terraform some other planet, how does it suddenly just leak out of the ship and in the vacuum of space starts eating the ship up? I mean, it's just, that's dumb. That to me, I'm like, I feel like I'm being talked down to,
Well, even more than that, my problem with the Tellarite captain is in a similar vein. Why did he break formation? Because we're in charge. Like, that was his motivation. Like, he's like, well, we're gonna change our position, even though at the beginning of the show they told us that any fluctuation with the tractor beam is going to cause calamity. And what does he do? He's like, oh, we're in charge. We're going to move in position because we're in charge. I'm running this operation. They're not really. It's like, okay, so this other Federation captain also has an out of control ego problem, just like the captain of the Cerritos. And then I'm like going, why are these two captains running this mission if it's actually important?
Right.
Like the Cerritos, clearly all they're good for is second contact. And they're obviously not very good at that. Why in the hell would they send them out to do this mission with this particular crew? Like, clearly you need actually a more competent crew. I'm like, so did these two just they just drew the right straws to get this job? I don't understand this. I was really annoyed when out of nowhere, because I just, the Tellarites are known for, being a little bit more aggressive. You know what I mean? Like we know that they're like that, but you would assume that a Tellarite captain in Starfleet would know better than to do what he did. And then because he destroyed a Federation starship in the process. I was just I didn't get it. Granted, it's just a clone of the other ship, so it wasn't that much of a loss. But still, I couldn't. I don't know. That really, I agree with you, Eric. That really bothered me, but not so much the science of it bothered me, more than the fact that this Tellarite captain has to prove that he's in charge. So he's going to risk everything and basically destroy his ship just because I'm running this mission. They're not running this mission. I found that particularly just. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I understand they needed to set up a scenario, but you know what? The other ship could have just been in bad shape, and the same thing could have happened in a slightly different manner. Just because the ship had been adrift and maybe something broke loose. Like you could have the same setup in a similar scenario without basically showing us that here's another Federation ship where this crew, oh, they're also incompetent. Oh, and this commander's really bad at his job too. It's like, well, wait a minute. What is it like this everywhere? Like, why are you showing us this? Even in a Star Trek comedy, I took high offense to that. I did not like that at all. Because did not like that.
They totally could have done that in a different way and made it actually kind of funny. You know, they could have had like Boimler, because they like to make fun of him all the time. He could have been transporting some of this stuff with the Orion girl to study it, and they mess it up, you know, and hilarity ensues. And they're the ones who cause the problem because they are the lower decks people, and they're supposed to be the wacky zany folks. You know what I mean? They could have easily done something like that, where they didn't follow the protocols correctly, or they just messed up. They just did something stupid. You know what I mean? And they don't have to go. They don't have to go there. They don't even have to go where you were talking about. They don't have to do anything about how bad the Tellarite captain is. Oh, by the way, I personally got offended by the thing also where they were talking about how boring he is, and he's one of those stuffy like museum types. Because people that like Star Trek, we're not into museums, right? We're not into science or history or any of that kind of stuff. That's so boring. That's so stupid. You know, yawn, yawn, yawn. I mean, it's just like, come on. I mean, you're insulting the fan base. You're clearly taking aim at the fan base and insulting them right to their face, and you're trying to see whether they're going to pick up on this stuff or not. And I just don't understand. I don't understand how fans are looking at this stuff and not seeing that. Like they're making fun of you. They're making fun of us. If you're a big Star Trek fan, that's who they're taking aim at, because you're the type of person that likes to go to a museum. You're the type of person that says, hey, a Starfleet captain wouldn't do that. That doesn't make any sense, because you're just a big nerd and blah, 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 blah. And that's how I kind of feel so much of New Trek. That's exactly how it feels to me, that they're trying to basically say, you're a bunch of dorks. Star Wars is way better. You know, let's just get it. Let's just kind of tear all this stuff down, tear down all the constructs, totally redo it, and let's eventually make it into a big joke or make it like Star Wars.
Well, and we had not discussed doing a Retro Rogues writing room, but as we're sitting here discussing this, and I've been thinking about it, I think I know the fix for this, for this episode. Yes, I think I have a fix. So here's my pitch, Eric. Okay, instead of what we got, are you a Seinfeld fan at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge Seinfeld fan, but when it's on, I'll watch it. Yeah.
Do you remember the episode they had with, it was like the Bizarro version of the Seinfeld crew? It was Bizarro Jerry and Bizarro George, and it was like this whole big thing where it was like they had their own restaurant, but everything was backwards.
That sounds really familiar, but I can't remember it specifically. That sounds really familiar, because I know Seinfeld was like a Superman fanatic. Jerry Seinfeld is like a Superman fanatic, and my understanding is there's something Superman in almost like every episode, like at least
there is
in the background or something like that. I remember hearing about that, but I can't remember if I actually saw that episode or not.
So the gist of it is, as Elaine falls in with, basically it's a Bizarro version of Kramer, Jerry, and George, and they have another diner that's on another part of town that's just like the diner they normally go to, but it's backwards.
Okay,
like they sit in a different order, so it's literally the idea of the Bizarro Superman, but it's like Bizarro Jerry and his group, right?
Right.
I think that's the fix. I think that's how you fix everything that I don't like about this particular episode. Is it on the other ship that looks almost just like the Cerritos, there's another lower decks crew, and they're the Bizarro version of our lower decks crew that we've been following. They're even zanier. They're even more incompetent than the crew that we have on the Cerritos, and they're the reason that everything goes sideways. And then our lower decks crew get to be the heroes because they're actually turns out better at their job than this other particular crew the other lower decks gang, and this other lower decks gang is behind what happens with the ancient alien ship and how this stuff basically gets out. So you have like, you've got like a bizarro version of the cyborg character, a bizarro version of the Orion girl, a bizarro version of Boimler, a bizarro version of our Mary Sue. And in that way, you don't have to keep constantly showing us that the bridge crews of these ships are incompetent. It's just they've entrusted these sort of like ancillary things that you shouldn't be able to screw up to this lower decks gang, and they're just not very good at it. So there's my pitch. That's how I think you fix this. You do a bizarro version of the lower decks crew on a version of the ship that almost looks exactly identical, but everything's just slightly backwards. So that's how I think you could fix this episode. Because that way, our lower decks crew gets to be the heroes. Our bridge crew doesn't have to be totally incompetent. I think that's how you fix that. Because I didn't really care for what they did, and I didn't think it was particularly funny. I like, for example, the only thing I thought the setup was interesting. I thought this thing with the extension, like the ascension idea. Like, that's kind of like a classic Trek construct. The not in the way that they did it, but this idea that a character is going to evolve into a higher form. I mean, that goes back to my initial thought was I was thinking of motion picture, but there's more than just motion picture at stake. They've done similar ideas, not quite in this manner, and that was one of the few. And again,
where no man has gone before.
Yeah,
of course, in that situation, it was actually it was in fact a bad thing,
right.
Because it made the person have basically a god complex, and turned the whole situation to something sinister. It's been done before. It's just that they actually did it right in the original Star Trek, whereas this is just garbage. And again, I would say that what they did with the Ascension thing was, again, they're making fun of the fans and trying to say that whole idea is dumb. Who would want to do that? You know what I mean? That's the kind of thing I feel like when they do that. That's the monologue I'm hearing. That's the kind of the message I'm getting from them is like that whole ascension idea, that whole idea of evolving and all that kind of stuff, which is a core element of Gene Roddenberry's vision of Star Trek, which is that humans are evolving and therefore they will achieve some sort of higher level of existence. That's a big part of Star Trek. No, that's stupid. Who would want to do that? Because if you do that, you're just going to go like insane or something like that. That's what they basically said. It's just dumb. Who would want to do that? Who would want to evolve? I mean, this one girl's perfect anyway. So who would want to? Why would we want to change her?
Yeah, and again, like when they were doing that, I thought that was kind of interesting. But again, when they're just being Star Trek, whether they're trying to insult it or not, I'm kind of enjoying it. And then when they're trying to be funny, it's leaving me cold. Even with the promotion of and I can't remember her name. We're just going to keep calling her Mary Sue because I don't know why I can't remember her name.
I refuse to learn her name, so that I just call her.
I can't remember it. Like I remember Boimler's name.
Know what her name is.
I can't. That's the thing. We're 4 episodes in, and I can't remember their names. So anyhow, Ensign Mary Sue, when she got promoted to lieutenant, like all that stuff was, and I found that stuff to be kind of entertaining. Even the fact that she didn't want to be at all these different briefings and whatever else. That was the thing. It's like when they were showing us stuff that's kind of like classic, in my mind, classic Trek, whether it's next gen or original series. I was enjoying all that stuff. Like that's the stuff where I was kind of being entertained. I was like, well, why don't they just treat it like us? And here's the sad part, Eric. I feel like it's been so long since we've just had and I know this is going to sound bad, not by the numbers, but it's been so long since we've just had a Star Trek show that follows the traditional conventions of Star Trek. I'm missing that. So whenever they're just trying to do Star Trek stuff, whether they're trying to insult it or they're trying to poke fun at it, I was enjoying that because it's been so long since we've just had a I don't want to use the word traditional either, but you know what I mean? It's been so long since we've just had.
No, I understand where you're coming from. My biggest issue is that the reason they're doing that is to make fun of it and say it's dumb. And that's why I can't enjoy it. I can't enjoy that at all. First of all, the idea of anybody in any profession that feels it's bad because they're promoted, that's idiotic. I understand people being anxious of being promoted, not wanting the responsibility. There's lots of people like that. But no, she doesn't want to be promoted because the bridge crew are idiots, and she knows that. And the very first thing that happens is she goes to a meeting where they were talking about replacing the conference chairs. Okay. That is obvious to me that the writers are saying this stuff is all stupid. Okay. Who would want to be part of the command crew because they're all a bunch of dummies anyway. And this is what they care about. No, let's go with the zany Mary Sue who can fix everything like magic because the writers are going to let her do whatever she wants. So it doesn't matter. She doesn't have to be knowledgeable or anything because we can just make her knowledgeable by the stroke of a pen. She doesn't have to earn that at all. She doesn't have to earn anything. She can be an ensign and she can be the best. She doesn't have to be a lieutenant and be the best. That's not the way it works. I'll tell you something, okay? There are people, obviously, in every profession that get promoted for the wrong reasons, okay? It's absolutely 100% true. It's true in every walk of life, and that even includes the military. But I'll tell you, a lot of those people, even if they aren't necessarily, quote, the best of the best, they in general are better than most. Okay, that's the bottom line, especially in the military, because they have a specific criteria they have to achieve to get that promotion. They have tests, they have examinations, they have to have a certain amount of tenure, all sorts of combinations of things that make that their rank means something. You know, I was always taught, you know, being in the military, you're not saluting the person, you're saluting the rank, because that rank means something. It's not because the person is better than you, but because I can almost 100% tell you none of these idiots writing this show have ever served in the military, so they can't understand that concept. They just think, oh, well, rank is just some pretentious thing that people have because they think they're better. You know what I mean? That's the kind of conversation I feel like they're having in the writing room, you know? And it's just insulting to me. It's insulting to me, you know, based on my real life experiences. And it's insulting to me in the way that I think Starfleet is a cool idea. I think Starfleet is an awesome idea. I would have wanted to join Starfleet if it was a real thing. And basically, I feel like this show is saying, Eric, you are such a nerd because you would want to do that.
Well, I can see what you're saying, and I'm not going to dispute any of it. But I was thinking as you were talking, you know what? Having a sort of a boardroom meeting to discuss the conference room chairs, that sounds like a subplot of The Office, except I think they would have been able to find a way to make that funny.
And in corporate America, that kind of thing does, I think, happen. You know what I mean? That is something that happens.
And maybe that's what maybe in a weird way, that's what they're trying to do a send up of. But you can't take the corporate America idea and apply that to Starfleet because it's not the same thing.
No, it doesn't make any sense. That's stupid.
Because that's like, for example, like in corporate America, and I know this because the current job I'm in now, I'm there because I left another company because I had a dispute with a manager who I thought was going to do a horrible job. And then that person went on to basically dismantle an entire department. And then that person actually did get promoted. So I think if they're trying to take the idea of, you know, sort of the unfortunate side of corporate America in terms of like business and apply that to Star Trek, that's not an apples to apples thing. That's not what Starfleet is. No. And in that sense, if that's what they were trying to do, that totally is a misnomer. They're totally missing the point entirely. And I could totally see what you're saying. And then I could also see too that that's the experience that they might be writing from. They might be thinking, oh, well, that's just like when I worked at SNS Entertainment Company and that horrible boss got promoted and they ran the company right into the ground. It's like, yeah, that's not Starfleet.
Well, I'll tell you the irony. The irony is if they have an actual real writer's room that they sit in, they probably do argue about chairs. And it's probably something that's important to them because they're sitting in those chairs a long time. It's not even a stupid thing to them. But somehow they're going to incorporate it into Star Trek, and now it's stupid, you know? Because if you are sitting around a lot and you're in crappy chairs, that does kind of suck, and that does become an issue. If you're uncomfortable all the time, yeah, that can be a problem. But that wasn't what this was about. They were arguing about the color scheme. It was just so dumb, and that was the whole point. It's like, yeah, this is what we want to see in a Star Trek show. Who wants to see that? I don't understand it. That's another thing. I'm just not understanding. Who is this show made for? You know, who is this show made for? I am really struggling to figure that out.
Well, I'm beginning to think it's not me because the things I'm probably supposed to take offense to, I go, I wish they would just do a regular Star Trek show. That's what I keep coming up with. This episode in particular, that's what I kept thinking. It's like, why don't they just do a regular Star Trek show then? If it can't be funny, can we just have a regular Star Trek show and just make it animated?
What I feel is like the construct of the show was actually not a bad idea. Finding this generation ship that something had gone wrong with that has this sort of mysterious terraforming gel. And there's sort of this mystery behind the ship. And then now they have to transport it so it can, undergo further study. It never got to its destination. No, they don't know exactly why. Like, did something happen to the engines or whatever? Did the place they were going to have some calamity itself? There's all sorts of cool Star Trek stuff in there. And then you can incorporate the comedy because the obvious thing is that something's going to go wrong with that terraforming gel. Okay, that is set up early in the episode. You can tell something's going to go wrong with that. And like I said, it's an easy thing to me. You just mishandle the stuff. It starts to destroy the ship, and then wacky things can happen. You can make this work without having to say Starfleet is dumb, be insulting to the fans, insulting to the whole construct of Star Trek, and actually do the same episode almost. You totally could have done it. But they go out of their way to go after these specific Star Trek constructs and say, this is dumb, this is stupid. Oh, but we mentioned Moriarty. We mentioned Abraham Lincoln. Oh, we had a Tellarite. Aren't you happy? Aren't you happy? Star Trek nerd, aren't you happy because we did those things?
Yeah.
That's how I feel about it. That's exactly how I feel about it.
Yeah, and I can see what you're saying. And yeah, like I said, I didn't hate this episode. I didn't like it too much either. It just, I guess that's the thing is that here we are again. We're 4 episodes in, and I'm like going, maybe this is a mistake. Just like with Picard, maybe this is a mistake, because it's not terribly entertaining to me. I mean, I like the awakening to the hamster thing and the ascension part of it. Like I was like, oh, that I could see where under a certain day maybe that might be funny, but I feel like regular show does that kind of humor better, and that's the thing. I keep thinking of other things that takes this same idea and the same premise, but they're able to make it work, And then there's some interesting ideas that they're not even visiting. I think could have been fun. The idea of a sister ship with, again, like I said, like a bizarro crew that's, just slightly off versions of the ones that we have, and showing how that maybe this lower decks crew, the ones that we're following, maybe they're not as bad as their jobs as we think they are, or that they may come across. That's a way to build them up, without necessarily tearing the bridge crew down every episode. I don't know. I feel like there's so many other things that could be doing. There's so many other ways to approach this material. I don't like how they're handling it. And I keep thinking it's like, and that's the sad part, Eric. With this episode, that's what I'm realizing. I'd just like to watch a regular Star Trek show again, like a more, you can update it and have it be contemporary, but can we just have a Star Trek show that's not ashamed to be Star Trek and and not trying to be something that Star Trek, often isn't. Like, because I feel like I'm beginning to see what you're saying about how it seems like with a lot of new Trek that they're completely missing the point. I mean, just completely missing the point. And then I kept thinking, it's like, would the Rogues Gallery hate us if all of a sudden we abandoned Lower Decks and started talking about Cobra Kai instead? Because Cobra Kai is cool. I really like Cobra Kai. I'd rather talk about Cobra Kai.
I vote we start talking about Cobra Kai.
Yeah,
that's my vote.
Where I'm at. Cobra
That's
Kai
exactly where I'm at.
It's so freaking good. And I intentionally didn't watch much of the second season so that the hopes was, eventually, we would try and get to it. I didn't expect them to move it to Netflix. And now that it's over on Netflix, I watched the whole first episode in its entirety and was just thinking, oh, this is so friggin' good. Like, it is so good. I would much rather be talking about Cobra Kai. I love the first season. Seeing the whole first episode, I was just like, hell yeah, this is awesome. I would rather talk about Cobra Kai. Because I don't like Lower Decks. I'm sorry.
Well, Jane says that's her vote too. So I'm inclined to say let's just scrap Lower Decks, and I say we're done, because I don't think I'll be honest. We've talked about this off the air. I don't think it's even working for the show, because I think you mentioned before. I think one of the problems is, unlike, let's say, Discovery, where there are people that love to hate it, and there's like a whole section of people that have actually made careers based off trashing Discovery. Well, the thing about that is that means people care, right? So people care enough to hate it, right? You have people that love it, but you also have people that care enough to hate it. I think Lower Decks is in a weird category, and you kind of mentioned this, Dave, that it's kind of in a weird category, I think, because it's a comedy and because it's animated. There are people that are just at this point that is like, I could care less, because no one's going to care about this anyway. It's not of any consequence to the rest of Trek. I mean, you have to be like the biggest, I don't know. I don't even know what to call you at this point. You have to be like the biggest, I don't know. I can't imagine fans quoting something from Lower Decks and saying, hey, Discovery contradicted that. That's not cool. No one's going to care that Discovery contradicted something from Lower Decks, because no one's going to care what they said in Lower Decks, right? That's kind of where I think you were coming from in a conversation we had before.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, there's no way that Lower Decks is going to be consequential,
right,
to whatever else is happening in the rest of Trek. And even if they do make it consequential, someone will just disregard whatever it is that happens, because at the end of the day, going back to the original Star Trek, the Filmation animated series, there's so many important episodes that exist within that is important to continuity. But Gene disavowed it, at one point, and said that it didn't count, that it didn't matter. And I could see people being
one of the last things he did. That was one of the last things he did before he died. We talked about that when we reviewed the series, that actually there was a renegotiation of what you could use as resources for writing Star Trek. It was most actually consequential to like the book writers, because they had certain things where it was like, well, you can use this, but don't use that. That's that part of that canon argument. And they had a directive, like Paramount had a directive that if you were writing for Star Trek, you were like writing a book, use these resources, don't use these. Well, after Next Gen came out, that got renegotiated. Gene was now in a strong position because he was the creator and executive producer of Next Gen. He renegotiated all that, and he said, axe the animated. No more animated references anymore. It was one of the last things he did before he died.
Yeah, and it's weird too, because I feel like that this show, and I'll compare it to the Orville in this context. There was a couple episodes early on in the Orville where you could tell that they were figuring out what they kind of wanted to be, and then they settled into it, and they found a groove, and it worked really good, But there's a little bit of kind of not quite sure, kind of here and there, and now it just comes across as quirky fun. It doesn't even come across as they were probably trying to get the tone just quite right. They were trying to figure out how much of Trek to be, how much comedy to be, and they figured it out, and it works great. Like I said, it's just a couple episodes in the first season, but it's like once they settled into it, it's so good. And then the second season was so wonderful, because they knew what they were doing, and it clicks, and it's just really good. And Lower Decks, I don't know if they're ever going to figure out what they're trying to do, because I don't think they understand. That's the difference. I feel like with Orville, they understood Trek enough to know where to find the funny, but at the same point, how to still, be just fun science fiction. Because this thing is trying so hard to be funny, it just doesn't work. That's the problem. It just doesn't work at all. I didn't find the Ascension bit funny, even though I think I was supposed to, when the guy's like, oh, there's a hamster or koala or whatever the hell it was.
The universe was on the back of a giant koala or something.
Yeah,
like
it just didn't work. That at the end of the day, that's the problem. Lower Decks doesn't work. It doesn't know what it wants to be, and it just doesn't work. And it's not fun. I'm just not enjoying watching it at all.
I think Lower Decks, even the way it is, could work if it wasn't Star Trek. I just wish they wouldn't have tried to make this Star Trek at all. Call it Galaxy Trek or something like that. And it's a very obviously sort of a homage parody. You know what I mean? And I think there was no reason to make this a Star Trek show, and that's probably where I would want to leave it. It shouldn't have been a Star Trek show. It doesn't fit. They could have done an actual parody. And again, we're going to be talking about the Orville later. We're going to be talking about the Orville comic Launch Day Part 1. The Orville has the advantage that because it's not actually Star Trek, they can get away with a lot of things that an actual Star Trek show, in my opinion, just can't do.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's the thing, too. It's hard to understand because in order for this to truly be Trek, it has to be somehow, somewhat, some sort of way remotely in continuity. And it just doesn't make any sense that you'd have two crews that was just completely horrible in Starfleet. I could see them having, one crew that's not very good, or maybe they just don't get the choice assignment, so they never have the opportunity to really prove their worth.
I can't even go there. I was about to say, well, I could see one guy not being good, and it's like I don't even see that. To me, in Starfleet, it would be like Barclay. It would be like Barclay. Barclay was a guy who everybody thought was no good, that he was a bad officer. He wasn't a bad officer. He was just shy, socially awkward, and he hadn't been really, given the chance to excel in the areas where he could excel. And isn't that a much better message? And wasn't that funny too? I think Barclay gets a lot of laughs. He's a very funny character. He's a very awkward character. But at the end of the day, Barclay is not incompetent. He's just awkward. And it just took someone like Geordi to show him, his way so that he could actually be a productive member of Starfleet.
And not only was he not awkward, had it not been for Barclay, I don't think the Voyager crew would eventually got back.
That's right.
He played a very integral role in that.
Fun fact, Barclay appears in more episodes of Voyager than Star Trek The Next Generation. Fun Trekkie fact,
Well,
he's actually in more episodes of Voyager.
Yeah, so if I know my mom's in the Rogues Gallery, she voted that we abandon Lower Decks and move on to something else. Eric and I both think Cobra Kai is
I think Cobra Kai fits the bill. Let's move on. Probably get more buzz because I don't think anybody cares about Star Trek Lower Decks. Even there's, like I said, there's not even the love to hate it crowd, And the people that I think do enjoy it, they watch it and they're done with it. You know what I mean? Yeah. They don't really want to talk about it. It's a comedy. It's hard to talk about comedy, as we've discovered, because at the end of the day, it's like it's not really consequential.
Yeah, it's a good. I think that's a good point. I think that's a good place to leave it. It's just not consequential, and I agree with you, Eric. I know from a numbers standpoint, looking at our own particular stats and numbers, reviewing Lower Decks is killing us. It ain't doing us any good. It's doing us absolutely no good. It's almost as bad as when we were talking about Warrior Nun. We just went from one sinking ship and just jumped on the back of another one that was already partially submerged, apparently. At least Warrior Nun started out of the gate kind of interesting, and then we went, well, this is going nowhere. And then we jumped on lower decks, and it's like, I think I might drown if we don't get off this ship. I got water up around my neck. I feel like I've got shackles on my feet. Like, I don't know if this is doing us any good. So, I'm ready I'm ready to be down with lower decks. It's not. I figured at the end of the day, at least it'd be kind of a fun Star Trek show. And like I said, I didn't hate, and that's the thing. I didn't hate this episode, just like I didn't hate the last one. I mean, they're okay. I just don't think they're very fun to talk about because it's just sort of like, I don't know. I mean, I don't like seeing Star Trek, Starfleet crews being incompetent. Right. I just don't. I don't like it. I mean, it would make sense if there was, the lower decks gang was whatever, then that's fine. But we keep, and again, I hate to do this, but again, bringing up red skirts. In red skirts, our bridge crew's not incompetent. And our security crew is also not incompetent. They just find themselves in situations, and the comedy comes out of the situation.
Right. There you go.
Exactly. It's situational humor. It's not everyone's horrible at their job. And actually, the red skirts, the security squad that we focus on in red skirts, they're incredibly good at what they do. That's the irony of the situation. They made one bad mistake, and this crack team gets assembled just by happenstance. That's the deal with red skirts. And watching Lower Decks, I just keep thinking, it's like, I wish I had this budget so I could do a red skirts animated show, because I think people would enjoy it. I like our characters better, and then I feel like they're ripping off some of our characters anyway. But I better stop right there before I get myself in trouble. Again, these are just my own opinions. These opinions do not reflect those of Retro Rogues nor anyone associated with this show, nor Red Skirts or anyone associated with Red Skirts. It's just my personal opinion as a human being, riffing at the moment. It's just an opinion, nothing else.
Well, let's leave this with Bobby, because I think he's got the last word, and I like it. Lower Decks is a bit rough. Laugh out loud, and that sums it all up right there.
It does. It most definitely does, in my opinion. So I guess with that, and I need to actually get the other graphics ready, because I don't have the other bumpers up. Look at that! Look at Eric all on top of things in the command room. Okay. So yeah,
yes,
let's go ahead.
Because this command crew knows what it's doing, unlike some people. So
that's true. All right, so we're going to go ahead and segue over into pop culture news. I know those in the Rogues Gallery know what's up, but for anyone who's new who may be watching the show at this moment, in pop culture news, we talk about anything interesting happening in the world of pop culture that either catches Eric's attention or my attention, we think you would enjoy knowing about, or we think you would enjoy talking about. At the end of the day, it's all about hopefully entertaining and finding something interesting for you, our dear valued viewer, our dear valued listener. So on this particular segment of pop culture news, I don't have a lot of stuff, but I do have something I think is kind of interesting that actually builds on something that happened that we talked about last episode. Eric, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Let me go first, because I have more stuff than you, and that way it's not just me talking the entire time. Because we talked about that off the air. I've got a couple stories, and you only have one for this section of the program. So let me get the article up for you. This is kind of neat because we haven't been able to talk about this in quite a while. In fact, no one's really been able to talk much about this. We did a story a while back where we talked about how Empire Strikes Back was actually the #1 movie in the nation, but with a very, very small box office to begin with. And that information wasn't coming from like official sources. Basically, what people were doing was they were piecing together that information from non-traditional sources. But look who's back. Box Office Mojo. These are kind of the industry standard when it comes to box office receipts and how this last weekend's box office was. And we actually have an article from Box Office Mojo here about the top winners of last weekend's movie theater releases. So the headline reads, Disney's The New Mutants delivers $7 million. Bill and Ted return with $1 million, and Tenet soars overseas. So for folks that were not aware, The New Mutants did come out in theaters, finally. I'm curious, Dave, did you actually get a chance to see this? Because you've been talking about New Mutants like crazy.
I wanted to go see it, but the initial buzz was not good, and I'm still freaked out with everything that's going on. So that was just me being a bit of a namby-pamby. So no, I did not go out to see it because I'm still whatever. I mean, because the thing is, at my day job, I'm having to wear a mask, and it's not easy wearing a mask for long extended periods of time.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't know how comfortable I felt about going to the movie theater. So movie theaters, if you're trying to get those of us who love going to the movie experience back out, you're going to have to find an interesting pitch, because I have to wear one at work, and it's not fun. And the idea of wearing one for 2 hours does not no, I just can't.
Yeah, I hear you there. So it says trying to predict the box office at this point, but I guess people are. As you mentioned, it says that critical reception was mixed to negative. It's got 35% on Rotten Tomatoes, 45 on Metacritic. It says it opened in about 2,412 theaters, which I'm really surprised at. I didn't realize that many theaters were even open, and I assume this is just North America. Says it had about a 3,000, says 2,902 per theater average. But basically, this is one of the first big movies to come out since all the shutdowns started to occur. And now a lot of theaters are starting to open up again. For instance, here in Arizona, I know a lot of theaters opened up this last weekend. I know in California and New York, most theaters are still closed. It said internationally, New Mutants added another 2.9 million. So they're pretty close to $10 million worldwide, which I personally don't think that's bad for the situation that we're in now. And remember, New Mutants also, it only came out in theaters. It did not come out on VOD or streaming at all. And then the other one that I was interested in was Bill and Ted's Face the Music. Now, they came in third place. They actually lost to Unhinged, which I don't know anything about that movie, Unhinged. That's actually a Russell Crowe movie, and I hadn't heard anything about it. That one earned $2.6 million. But Bill and Ted Face the Music only earned about $1 million, but they were in far less theaters than New Mutants and Unhinged. They were only in about 1,000 theaters. Now, the reason for that is because Bill and Ted did something different. They went the Trolls Trolls World Tour route. They did a simultaneous release. So they were being released in theaters and VOD at the same time. And a lot of the bigger theater chains that just opened back up, like AMC and Harkins, those are some of the big chains that actually opened back up. They refused to show Bill and Ted because it was on VOD. And I think that's kind of interesting. In my area, I could only find one theater that had Bill and Ted showing, and it was an independent theater. Not sure if you were aware of that issue, Dave, about the fact that they did that simultaneous release and how they were in much fewer theaters than Dark Phoenix was.
Well, and it's New Mutants. I don't.
Sorry, Dark Phoenix is on my list. That's part of the article too. But yeah,
right.
Yeah, New Mutants.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of short-sighted, because if they had found a way to coordinate what they were doing, I think it would have helped create more awareness, one, for the theaters being open, and then number two, I think it would have just helped the movie obviously overall. At the end of the day, I feel like it's weird, because I understand that you as a business owner, you have to look out for your own interests. I get that. Okay. I mean, as a business owner myself, I completely understand that concept. But at the same time too, you have to remember that you have to do what's right by hopefully your customers and potentially your return customers. You're wanting to get them to come back. You want them to support what you're doing. You need them to support the industry as a whole. You know, I mean, I just feel like sometimes that this sort of petty, like, well, if you're going to do that, well, then forget you. You know, I don't feel like that's doing anyone any favors. So, you know, I feel like that they're cut. And that at the end of the day, this all requires an interesting, creative, problem-solving approach. You know, whether it's like, you know, you have it available for people to watch inside the movie theater, maybe you're also doing something outside, right? That's kind of more like a drive-in type experience, but at the same point, you know, maybe people could purchase tickets for VOD by purchasing it through Harkins, by purchasing it through AMC. Like, there's all different ways to approach this that helps the movie industry, that helps the studio, that helps the film do better, and helps the theater owners at the same time. You know, it's just, I feel like everyone needs to stop thinking about doing things the same old way and start looking for different ways to approach the problem of where we find ourselves at the moment. I know it's a long-winded answer, but I was aware that there'd been some of that. I didn't realize it was affecting this film in particular. Because that's the irony. If I could have just watched New Mutants at home, I would have watched New Mutants. I would have watched it VOD. I would have loved to watch it VOD. I heard Lockheed's in the movie. I really want to see Lockheed. And I'm very excited to see Magic on the big screen. So I would have totally done that, because I just don't feel comfortable going into the movie theater right now. And not because of the obvious reasons, but just because I'm having to wear a mask at work, and I don't want to have to wear it anymore if I don't have to. I don't want to wear it any more than I have to. That's just where I'm at. So maybe that's just me.
Bobby Chambers actually agrees with you, and he says, "Same here, Dave. I have one of them on for 13 hours a day at work, and I understand that concern 100% completely. If you're wearing a mask at work all the time, you probably don't want to wear it on your off time. That's something that I think is totally reasonable and totally makes sense. The one thing I'm going to say is that there is a contrast to this situation going on with Disney. In fact, that's going to be my Streaming Wars article. And there's the Disney approach, which basically says, screw you theaters, we're just going to go straight VOD. And the thing that actually really gets me too is that really affects too the independent theaters and the drive-ins that have been open the entire time. At least in many states, they've been open the entire time. I think California and New York even closed down drive-ins at one time because they're insane, in my opinion. But the drive-ins in a lot of places, they were the only theaters that were open, and they do provide a sort of middle ground between just ordering at home and actually having a kind of semi-social experience and still going where you can actually be around other people, but you're not. It's literally like a compromised middle ground situation, and it's perfect. And we've talked about on the show sort of the possibility of the rise of the drive-ins. Walmart is doing community drive-ins at their many of their stores. A lot of places are doing this. A lot of communities are doing this. And finally, we're starting to see some new movies come out. And it would be awesome if they could be, if we could have some of these films still being shown in that sort of public setting where you do have sort of a compromise. You can stay in your own car. You don't have to worry about those kinds of things about wearing a mask. So I think it's better what Universal was doing and what their policy has been. Obviously, Trolls was the first film to do that. I can say that film did come out in my local drive-in. We only have one left, but it did come out in there. Interestingly enough, Bill and Ted did not, which I don't quite understand what happened there, because Bill and Ted did not come out at the local drive-in. It was some other independent indoor theater that actually had it in my area. So there is something going on there. But I would rather have a situation where they sort of decide to share things, and they have sort of a simultaneous release with VOD and with the theaters at the same time, at least as long as so many theaters, for one thing, are closed anyway, because we still have two major markets in the United States where they're closed, which is California and New York. The theater industry has to be understanding of that. I do also know that part of the problem is sometimes it becomes an issue with the revenue sharing, where basically the studios will basically ask for like the same amount of money they normally would have with an exclusive deal. And then the theaters are like, wait a second, if this isn't going to be exclusive, that's where that, that special engagement kind of thing comes from. That's why you can't use coupons, blah, 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 because it's a
Right.
special engagement. In those situations, the studio gets a huge cut of the proceeds. I've heard as much as like 75-80% of the ticket goes straight to the studio. And what the theaters will do is come back and say, well, if you're doing simultaneous VOD, then we should have the non-exclusive deal, not the exclusive deal when it comes out. That I agree with 100%. Even in these times with the pandemic, I think that's a good point for the movie theaters to say, we shouldn't have the same deal, the same, because the other thing is, remember, a lot of these theaters, they're under capacity. They're only allowed to have like 50%, 25% capacity, depending on the rules in their state or their country. So they're not allowed to be at full capacity. So the idea that they would be getting the same cut of the ticket that they normally would get in an exclusive deal, with no pandemic and all that kind of stuff, that's not right either. So I do understand some of the back and forth that's going on between the studios and the theaters in that respect. I would like them to come together to some kind of deal, though, where you could have these movies available for people that want to stay home and watch them on VOD, but also available in the theater for those of us that are willing to do that, because there's plenty of us that are.
Yeah, I agree. And I was just on my phone. I was trying to see if there was somewhere to actually watch New Mutants at the drive-in, and there are a lot of drive-ins that were showing New Mutants. I get
mine is the one in Glendale. The one in my area, they're showing New Mutants.
See, that would have been. We just don't have anything like that here. Like even our Walmarts, they're not doing the pop-up drive-ins. We just had briefly at the height of the pandemic, the town itself did a couple of and that's the thing. I mean, I'm surprised that some of the theaters aren't just doing like a pop-up drive-in, like in their parking lots.
Well, Harkins did that in a couple places. Harkins actually did that at the Chandler Mall, and at least one other place that I'm aware of where they did that. They did a pop-up in the parking lot.
See, and that's the thing. I feel like that the movie industry as a whole needs to just find an interesting, creative solution to try and help, everyone come out a little bit better with what's going on. That's my whole thing. And I because I just don't feel comfortable because wearing it at work's one thing. You got to go to the grocery store. You got to run some errands. I get that. I don't have an issue with that. But it's just the idea of going and doing something fun where I'm going to have to wear one for several hours. It just doesn't work for me. So,
and I want to point out the other part of this article, of this headline, is about Tenet's release. Now, Tenet is considered the one. They're considered like a make or break film right now because they are considered like the only big blockbuster that's going to be coming out right now, and this is going to be a real testing of the waters. Tenet already came out internationally, and it actually grossed more than $53 million. It's 41 markets, but that was including Canada. It said it actually did pretty well in the United Kingdom, getting about 7 million. France, it got almost 7 million. In Korea, it got over 5 million. In Germany, it got over 4 million. And it's interesting looking at the number of screens. The United Kingdom has over 3,000 screens available. France had over 1,000. Korea had over 2,000 screens. Germany had over 2,000 screens. So one of the other points about this is internationally, there are lots of theaters that are open right now, and there are lots of people willing to go to the movies.
Well, there you go. All right. Well, that's interesting.
Well, I'm very curious to see what happens with Tenet once it's released here in the United States.
Right.
How it's out. So.
Yeah. Well, that'll be interesting. All right. Cool. Are we good to let me cover a pop culture story here real quick?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is a bit of a follow up, actually, to last week. We had been talking a lot about what happened with all the massive layoffs and everything that happened at DC Comics, and then there was a lot of talk that and confirmation that they were looking to hire basically an esports person to come over and run DC Comics. Well, it's official. This is from IGN. This is actually from today. This is written by Jesse Shading. Apologies if I'm not saying that correctly. Shaden. And it says DC Comics hires former Activision Blizzard CMO as general manager. And then this says Cherry will oversee business affairs, editorial, talent services, marketing, sales, brand, and direct to consumer for DC. Talent services. Does that mean I can send him an email? Because I got some questions. Anyhow, with DC and parent company Warner Media dealing with the fallout of major layoffs, a new piece of the corporate puzzle has emerged. DC has now hired former Activision Blizzard Chief Marketing Officer Daniel Cherry to fill the position of Senior Vice President and General Manager. According to The Hollywood Reporter, Cherry will begin his role on September 8th, and his responsibilities include overseeing business affairs editorial, talent services, marketing, sales, brand, and direct-to-consumer for DC. Cherry will report directly to Warner Media's president of global brands and experience, Pamela Lifford, and will work closely with Senior VP, Business Strategy, Finance, and Administration, Anne DePies. It might even be DePies. Again, apologies if I'm not saying that correctly. The general manager position is a new addition to DC's executive leadership. DC is touting Cherry's experience, again, in the esports realm, while at Activision, I don't get it. Aside, the company is looking to branch beyond its traditional forms of consumer outreach and target new untapped segments of the comic book market. What is that even supposed to mean? Let's just stop for a second. I'm going to read that again, okay, because I don't understand. Maybe you can help me understand, Eric. So it says here, DC is touting Cherry's experience in the esports realm while at Activision. A sign the company is looking to branch beyond its traditional forms of consumer outreach and target new, untapped segments of the comic book market. What the hell does that mean? Because let's just stop for a second and just let that sink in, okay? Because Warner Brothers sold their video game division, if I remember correctly, quite some time ago. They just dumped it.
No, that was a rumor we were talking about, that AT&T was looking to do that. That has not happened yet, but that's the rumor, and we did report on that AT&T does want to dump Warner Brother games, but that has not happened yet.
And it gets even weirder because, like, I think Rocksteady and there's other development groups that have been actually doing the games. And the Batman Arkham games were very popular. People really liked them. We covered the Suicide Squad game that's coming up. That looks really good. That looks interesting. They've got that new Gotham Knights game. Like, wouldn't that technically qualify as the esports thing? And someone who's been in Activision, like, don't they already have inroads into the video game thing? How is someone who's got experience in video games supposed to target new untapped segments of the comic book market? Do you mean just find different ways to exploit comic book material into other markets? I don't understand. That doesn't make any sense to me. It says THR also notes this new position is designed to allow Publisher Chief Operating Officer Jim Lee to focus on building up the wider DC brand. It's unknown whether Lee would continue under those titles to take on a new position at DC. What? I don't. Wasn't that what Jim was already doing?
Well, I do know from our previous coverage and that interview that we were talking about that Jim Lee has said that it was always kind of the plan that somebody else would be in charge of the sort of business side. And I think even you and I have talked about whether Jim Lee actually is a good fit on the business side of DC Comics. There's no doubt that he's a great fit on the creative side, but, you know, is he really capable of overseeing the business side of things? I think that there was a question mark on that. And I think Jim Lee himself understood that limitation. The question to me becomes whether Daniel Cherry himself is the right fit for that role. I don't know anything about him, to be honest. Bobby mentions that Activision ruined Blizzard, so he's not happy. And I don't know about that story. I know Blizzard is basically really big because of World of Warcraft. That's their one of their biggest claims to fame. And World of Warcraft is just absolutely huge. There's like a whole subculture for World of Warcraft. Now, has that gone down the tubes, as Bobby said? I don't know. I find that interesting. I've never been a World of Warcraft guy. Interestingly enough, I have become a big Witcher guy, and Warner Brother Games is the publisher of the Witcher games. So that's kind of interesting too, because that's a property that it's kind of funny because that's a property that's nothing to do with DC. Witcher is its own thing, and yet Warner Brother Games makes the Witcher games, which I think is really interesting, or at least publishes them. They don't make them. There's actually a company in Poland. Those are actually made in Poland, of all places, because that's where The Witcher comes from. That's where the books come from. But it's interesting that Warner Brother Games is the publisher of the Witcher games, and it has nothing that has nothing to do with any of the DC properties or anything like that. I don't know. I don't know much about this guy to know whether he's the right fit or not. I do think that there was a recognition within the leadership of DC that Jim Lee was not the person to be running the business side of DC Comics. Whether that's right or wrong, I think there are reasons for that. In fact, Dave, and you and I have actually discussed some of those reasons off the air, why Jim Lee might not be the best fit on the business side of DC Comics.
Well, and I understand that, but the part of this that I find totally confusing, and to use a Harley Quinn reference from Suicide Squad, since I was just mentioning Suicide Squad, I find it quite vexing.
Are you terribly vexed?
I'm terribly vexed. Maybe it's the voices in my head that are telling me that this doesn't make any sense. So this guy was the former Activision Blizzard chief marketing officer. Everyone think about that. Marketing officer. Okay. And then down here, he's going to be the general manager, basically overseeing all this stuff. And then they're saying that his experience in the esports realm, well, at Activision, okay, is a sign that the company is looking to branch beyond its traditional forms of consumer outreach and target new, untapped segments of the comic book market. Yet that frees Jim Lee up to focus on building up the wider DC brand. What? Okay. So I guess the next few months, whatever the hell it is that DC intends to do, or whatever the hell it is AT&T intends to do with DC, whatever the hell is happening may eventually become clear. Because I'm going to tell you right now, after reading this, I have no idea why he was a good fit for this. I have no idea why in the hell, they seem to think this is a good idea. I think they're holding on to Jim Lee because Jim can still sell books. I think that's the whole reason they're holding on to Jim. They're going to let Jim do whatever the hell it is he wants to do, because they know at the end of the day, he can, you know what I mean, sell comics. All right? Because Jim is very good at that. He's an incredibly talented dude. He's a creative force. I understand why you would keep Jim around. You do not want to get rid of Jim. But I don't understand what the hell that a marketing guy coming in to manage the day-to-day business side of DC, I'm like, okay, well, maybe he doesn't want to do marketing so much anymore. And maybe he just wants to do the day-to-day. But then in this thing, they say he's going to branch beyond traditional forms of consumer outreach and target new untapped segments of the comic book market. Because I'm going to tell you right now, the whole point of the New 52, everybody, in case anyone forgot the last time I brought this up, was that better integrate the movies, the TV shows, the comic books, the graphic novels, the books, the toys, the video games, take it all and just bring it together in a more tight-knit whole, right? So they could better exploit the properties and the brands that DC controls to leverage that to just make more money for Warner Brothers at the end of the day. That was the whole goal of the New 52. sounds like that's what this guy's supposed to be doing too. So it's like, okay, so I guess that just didn't work. I don't know. None of this makes any sense to me still. I just bring this story up because it turns out this is their esports guy. I still don't understand why they needed an esports guy, but they got an esports guy. So
I don't think they wanted an esports guy. At least that's not how I take it. I think they wanted a marketing guy. Now, I don't know much about this person. And that's one of the things that really kind of makes me have to comment with my hands tied behind my back. But Bobby apparently does have some knowledge of this person from the gaming side. He mentions it would take 2 episodes to explain how badly they damaged, meaning how badly Activision damaged Blizzard. And he just says, wow. Apparently, Bobby, I'm assuming that you were you a big World of Warcraft guy? I'm curious what your Blizzard in was and how you know what happened there, because I don't have that. I don't have that as a fan because I never got into World of Warcraft. As far as I know, I don't think I've actually ever played any of the Blizzard games, which is kind of crazy. There's got to be something I played because I know they've done other stuff. I have played Activision games. Activision used to be a huge name, even for people into old school games and stuff like that. They used to be really big. They used to make all sorts of big stuff, tentpole, big game stuff. But one of the things Bobby mentioned is he kind of questions, is this really going to mean fewer monthly comics? And Bobby does mention it is World of Warcraft that gives him his Blizzard knowledge. But that's a fair question. Is it ultimately going to mean fewer monthly comics? That was something that I felt in Jim Lee's interview that he danced around a little bit. And we do have somebody who just joined us right now, which is Donnie Pearson. We're glad to have you back. Thank you. He did say hello to myself and Dave, everybody. He said, sorry for the delay. I was working on a Boeing 787 model using 3D modeling software called Blender. I'm actually familiar with that software, Donnie, Blender. And that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And we understand that people have other things that they like to do besides just watch us, doing our broadcast. But we appreciate you coming in now. And if you're not kind of confused what we're talking about basically the new CMO, I believe is the title of DC Comics. That Daniel Cherry, who has a background in esports, and how we're a little bit confused about why an esports guy is taking a prominent position at DC Comics. So that's where we're at.
Yep, and I feel like if we're ready to move on, I think I've kind of talked this thing to death. I just reading this article. The reason I wanted to bring it up is because I didn't understand. It just sounds like a lot of spin, because I don't think they understand. I don't think someone really truly has a vision for what they're going to do with DC. And if they do have a vision, they're hiding it in all this spin. I really think they're hiding it in all this spin.
That's very possible. There may not be a plan, so to speak. One thing I think we both speculated about was whether whoever they were going to be hiring, if he maybe had a personal in with either someone at Warner Brothers Media or even AT&T itself, and they wanted to put him somewhere, and they couldn't think of any other place to put him. But I do understand the need for DC to have a strong marketing voice. I do think that's very, very important for DC. I think DC could be much bigger than Marvel. I've always thought that, even though Marvel traditionally has always been bigger than DC. They've usually had better numbers, except for a couple different eras that I remember where DC had better numbers. So there is some sort of a gap there where I think that definitely DC and Warner Brothers, AT&T now could do better. Whether that's what the intent is or they have a plan to do that or not, I don't know. One thing I could see off the top of my head is that DC Comics may be sponsoring the next big e-gaming tournament. I could see that.
But that's just an ad buy. That's a sponsorship buy. You don't have to hire an esports guy just because you want to have a stronger presence in a particular area. You just do a deal. I that's what I'm saying. Like I don't understand, because sometimes, well, I'm not going to go there because I don't want to get us in any legal trouble. But anyhow, the point is this. This sounds like spin, because whatever it is they want to do, they don't want anyone to know exactly what they intend to do. Or number two, I don't think they know what they want to do. They're installing someone in a position for right now because they realize they've got a situation they have to get under control. And this just seems to fit at the moment, because otherwise nothing about this move makes any sense to me whatsoever. And to be honest with you, Eric, in my opinion, if they feel like they have a marketing problem, what they really need to do is go out and get one of these great marketing agencies that's doing a lot of really killer work right now, and not even worry with having an in-house staff. That's another possible solution. They've got enough funds to do that. Just go find a killer marketing team that's doing great work, give them the DC brand, give them some targets to hit, and let them run with it and see what they could do. I mean, the DC characters, the legacy, the value of these brands, the properties, like, they could totally kill it, literally. I mean, especially if they went and found an agency that's hungry to do something like this, who's doing great work. I mean, all kinds of fun, creative stuff they could do to increase the visibility of the DC brand. And I don't think when you look at the response of some of the fandom stuff, I don't even think it's I don't think they have a marketing problem. I think they have a direction problem. For whatever reason, they don't know what it is they want to do. And so they're just kind of sticking people in places to kind of hold this thing together until they figure out what they want to do. And along the lines of like not understanding marketing, we're getting some targeted ads on this website based off the things that I do professionally and the things that I use for my company. And then we're getting these, hey, save up to 60% on this Adobe Creative Cloud thing. I feel like that's kind of loosely, based on my searches and stuff. But I just think it's funny. I already have a full Creative Cloud license, so I don't need to see those ads. Anyhow, all right. Are we good to move on?
Yeah, I think so. But we will go back for a little bit. Donnie didn't get to see our review. Donnie said, I find last week's episode of Star Trek Lower Decks more awesome and funnier than before. So stoked about this week. Donnie, I am sorry to tell you we did not agree with that. And we are probably going to move away from doing Lower Deck stuff. I hope that doesn't mean we lose you as a viewer. We always do allow other people to have opinions that are different than our own. And I know that you've been enjoying Lower Decks a lot, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that if you're enjoying it. It's become a little bit of a chore, I think, for Dave and myself. So we are most likely going to be moving on from that coverage. Sorry to say. If you are interested in seeing our review, you can always look at the playback whenever this show posts on either Twitter or Twitch or YouTube or Facebook. We're on all those platforms, and you can check out what our review was and what the issues we had with Lower Decks actually were. But Donnie does mention that he and his family are actually AT&T Mobility customers. I am an AT&T customer as well, and I am an AT&T stockholder. I actually have bought some AT&T stock. So,
and just to tag on to what Eric is saying, the one laugh out loud moment I had was actually something that was in the teaser for next week's episode. I did mention that earlier in the review, that I saw what they were trying to do, but it just didn't work for me. And then I found some things about the episode I didn't personally like, and it bothered me. But it's funny because the teaser for next week's episode had a moment in which I did laugh that I thought was really funny. But yeah, we're probably going to move on, just because it's not working for Eric or myself to be kind of blunt, and we suffered all the way through Picard, and it actually damaged how I feel about Next Gen now. So I don't want to do that anymore if I don't have to. So
Donnie says no apologies needed. No disrespect to those who were like, quote, Lower Decks drools. So Donnie gets it, and Donnie apparently is one of those people that can understand when people have a different opinion than himself, which we really appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it. And like I said, I didn't hate the show. It just for us to continue to cover it's just kind of turning into the same thing. It's like, it was okay. that's been my review of the last several episodes. And then it's like, as I said in my review earlier, and I won't drone on about this too much, is there's moments in which the show's just doing Star Trek, and that's the stuff I find most entertaining. I feel like I would just like a regular Star Trek show. I miss just regular Star Trek, formulaic or traditional or whatever it is, however people want to label it, whether derogatory or positive. It's like I just miss Star Trek when it's being Star Trek. I didn't realize how much I missed it, and I think I just missed regular Star Trek. So instead of Star Trek trying not to be Star Trek trying to be something else, I just miss Star Trek being Star Trek.
Understood, Dave, loud and clear. Now, I did actually have something from the world of gaming, since you were talking about how terrible it is that an esports guy is involved with DC Comics right now. Let's move on to some gaming stuff. So the Witcher is actually a huge franchise in gaming that I've gotten into. We actually tried to review the series on this show, and we struggled with that one. Dave in particular, I think, really struggled with the Witcher TV show on Netflix. But for folks that don't know, The Witcher is a multimedia franchise at this point. It actually started out as books in Poland. I've never read any of the books. Most people know The Witcher because of the video games. And interestingly enough, the Netflix series itself is actually based on the books and not based on the video games. The video games is actually its own story and continuation beyond the books. So they are not an adaptation. So it's kind of an interesting situation. So it's like, people who like the books may not like the game. People who like the game may not like the books. And likewise, they may not like the TV shows. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of funny the way that's worked out. But they're coming out with another game for The Witcher called Monster Slayer. And it says it will let you track, study, and hunt monsters on your phone. So what people are comparing this to, of course, is Pokemon Go. That this is basically going to be The Witcher for like a Pokemon Go, where you'd actually go around, hunting monsters. So I haven't seen the trailer, so I'm going to put it on here. I haven't actually watched it. And I thought I would just kind of look at it and see what I think. And obviously Dave can chime in as well. Looks like right now we got some guy in real life walking around with his phone, which is the way that you would be playing the game. Oh, he has a Witcher-style hairdo for those that are not into The Witcher. That's kind of funny. This guy has like a Witcher-style hairdo kind of. Witcher doesn't have the man bun so much, but he has kind of like that ponytail in the back thing. He does that. So the dog is barking at something, alerting to something. I'm guessing he's alerting to a monster. The dog is seeing a monster around the corner, because we know animals are more sensitive to that kind of thing. There's some mist there. If you've played any of the Witcher games, mist is usually not a good thing, especially if it's not a normal, natural mist. And there we go. There's the monster. And all we get is a coming soon. Nobody knows when this thing is actually coming out. I think it's actually a pretty neat idea. I know how popular Pokemon Go has been. My daughters actually really like that. Of all things, their grandmother on the maternal side, she's really into it. So it kind of shows you that has an appeal to like all ages. And I think The Witcher doing something like that is kind of interesting to me. I guess we'll see what the game actually turns out like. But I don't know. Had you heard about this, Dave, at all? I'm sure you're familiar with Pokemon Go.
I'm familiar with Pokemon Go. I'm loosely familiar with Witcher because, of course, like you said, we had been watching. Well, I think we watched one or two episodes of it. I forget of the show, and I know that apparently Henry Cavill is a big fan of it because he really wanted to play that part. And I know that it does have a following.
There's an interesting story there in that Henry Cavill considers himself a gamer, and he got into The Witcher because of the games. And when he heard about the Witcher series, he wanted to get involved because he loved the games. He did not find out that there was a Witcher book series until he actually started, till he actually, tried to get on the show, which is kind of funny.
Interesting.
So he did not know what the source material was. even though he was into the games.
Interesting. Well, that's cool. But no, yeah, I mean, I understood the premise of Pokemon Go. It looks interesting. I could see where people would really enjoy this. You know, it checks off a lot of sort of niche, fun entertainment boxes for people that are into certain kinds of genres. So, and I know that part of the fascination, the thing that people liked about Pokemon Go was the idea that it was like, these creatures were in the real world, that they were amongst us. So I could see that being really popular with people, and especially for people that maybe felt like they couldn't get into Pokemon Go because it was for kids. I could see some people going, "Oh, well, this is fun because this would be for me," because I like monsters, or I like horror movies, or I like the Witcher video game. I could see this potentially going over with a large audience as long as it's fun and entertaining.
Yeah, it's always going to be how it actually works. How the gameplay actually works, whether it's going to be popular. I think. I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to. But I know a lot of people that even to this day, because Pokemon Go was definitely a fad at one point. It seemed like everybody was playing it. And now it's not so much a fad, but it still has a very loyal following. And The Witcher is, like I said, a big multimedia franchise. So I think it has the potential to be real. If it's done well, I think it has the potential to be a really big thing.
I could see that. I could definitely see that. And, in this same concept, I'm surprised in hindsight that there aren't more game developers, running with this concept, a version of it where it's aliens,
Well, I think there have
aliens.
been.
There have been?
There are plenty of ripoffs of Pokemon Go trying to use this format, and it just hasn't caught on the way that Pokemon Go has. Jane actually mentions, he says, my son Ronnie and I know where all the hot spots for Pokemon Go are in our area. I mean, that kind of shows you like the range of people that play that game. I'd be curious if Jane would be interested in playing the Witcher version, or if she even knows about the Witcher what the Witcher is. But of course, the basic idea is, even if you don't know what the Witcher is, instead of going after capturing Pokemon, to use for your, to actually capture Pokemon, because that's what Pokemon Go does, you'd be slaying monsters. That would be the idea. So
interesting. Cool. Well, with that, do you have anything else for pop culture, or is that it?
That's, I actually do have one more for pop culture, and I'll do it real brief because it's not something traditional that we talk about on the show, but we have talked about sports on the show before. In fact, the last time I think we talked about anything, we were talking about the Major League Baseball's plan way back when the pandemic was first starting, the shutdowns were starting, and there was this sort of crazy idea to play all the games actually in Arizona. And we were kind of mentioning that. And ultimately, that's not what they did. They decided that they would just play the games without crowds. But a lot of back and forth has been going on about college football. And I am a big college football fan. My father, who we're dedicating the show to, he actually was a very big football fan in general. But we connected on the college stuff, especially, because I'm not a big pro football fan. That's the bottom line. And there's been a lot of controversy about what was going to happen about this season. For folks that don't know, the Pac-12, which is the area that I live in, is under the Pac-12. They decided to opt out this season. So did the Big Ten. But it does sound like there's some individual teams that may not be following that. That's kind of an ongoing story right now. But many of the other conferences, such as the SEC, the ACC, and also the Big 12, they are going to play. They're getting ready to play ball. So this is from the ESPN press room, and it says ESPN's college football coverage continues with the debut of ABC's Saturday Night Football opening, and it has also opening weeks for the ACC and SEC matchups. So this is basically a schedule from ESPN. For folks who don't realize that, ESPN is part of Disney. Therefore, they are also connected with ABC Sports. There is no ABC Sports. Essentially, ESPN has taken it over. So they're actually going to be having quite a few games this year. with the remaining conferences. And quite frankly, I'm pretty excited about this. I'm hoping that this really works out and this goes well. But they're talking about on Saturday, September 12th, Saturday Night Football on ABC, free TV. Don't need to have a cable subscription. It looks like it's going to be Clemson versus Wake Forest. So that's coming up, and they've actually got the full schedule. Or I'm not sure the full schedule, but they have quite a bit of the first weeks of football from the different outlets that are connected to ESPN on this particular article. And again, this is from the ESPN press room. It's a press release. And it's pretty interesting. One of the things I've talked about is I have the Disney bundle. So I have Disney Plus, Hulu, and ESPN Plus. And I have constantly said that ESPN Plus is the biggest ripoff in the freaking world. And the reason is because the only really cool thing or exclusive thing on ESPN Plus is UFC. Now, to watch UFC fights on ESPN Plus, you have to pay for the pay-per-view unless it's like some sort of special that you don't have to, and those are rare. The big fights for UFC, you have to pay the additional pay-per-view fee on top of ESPN Plus. By the way, this is going to connect to my Streaming Wars segment later on because Disney's doing kind of the same thing now with movies. Anyway, ESPN Plus, though, it says is going to have a lot of these games. It says on Saturday, September 12th, they're going to have the Citadel versus South Florida on ESPN Plus. There's actually more games listed here that say that they're going to be on ESPN Plus, which is something that I'm hopeful of because for the most part, ESPN Plus has just been a huge dud for me. And it's a part of the package that I'm just like, I don't even feel like I need this or want this. I think that package has the potential to be like the silver bullet in the streaming wars because those three things together, especially if Disney does things right and they keep Disney as sort of more of that family oriented thing, they use Hulu maybe to do some more of their adult type stuff, and then they have all the sports on ESPN Plus. That could be a total winning combination. We'll just have to see if that's what actually pans out or not. But I thought I would just mention that because there has been some controversy about that, about college football, whether they be playing or not. And it does look like at least three of the Big Five conferences are going forward. And I know a few of the other conferences are also going to be going forward this year and playing some football.
Interesting. I'm not too much of a sports guy, so that's what I got. Interesting.
I can understand that. Not everybody is. It's like anything else, right? If it's not your cup of tea, it's not your cup of tea. And Donnie had a point. He says, I can imagine Disney buying out Heart's 20% share of ESPN, retiring the ESPN brand, and reviving the ABC Sports brand. For example, ESPN main branded as ABC Sports 1, ESPN 2 rebranded to ABC Sports 2, etc. I actually think that'd be really interesting, Donnie, but I don't see it happening because essentially the entire ABC Sports brand was dumped as soon as basically they kind of merged everything with ESPN. So anytime you see sports on ABC now, it's clearly ESPN. So I don't really see them dumping that brand for ABC Sports. I wish they kind of would have maintained ABC Sports. Like I think it would have been nice if the ESPN anchors, when they were doing stuff that's going to be on ABC, if they put on the old jackets and all that kind of stuff and said, hey, we're ABC Sports tonight because even though we're ESPN guys, we're going to keep that legacy going. But, it does relate to something that Dave and I talk about quite frequently on this show, which is branding and how these companies do that when they decide to take a particular brand and then they just throw it away. And that is the case with ABC Sports. Disney wanted ABC, but they decided, hey, we got a sports thing already. We got ESPN, so no more ABC Sports. But I think that would have been interesting if they'd done something like that.
Yeah, that again, interesting. Yeah, and I always find it weird when they do that, when they take a valuable established brand in whatever market segment it exists in, and they go, well, we bought this thing. We bought it for these pieces over here, but this other stuff over here, we didn't buy it for that. This has no value to us. Well, we'll just pitch it. we won't make it available for anyone else to do anything with it because we don't need the competition in that space. But yeah, we'll just pitch this over here and just keep this other bit. Because it's funny because I would tend to think that obviously ABC Sports has a much longer history, storied history and legacy than ESPN, in my mind anyway, just because in terms of longevity, relevance, across decades, that kind of idea. But who knows? Who knows? I mean, I never understand sometimes why they do certain things, and sometimes why certain things they go, well, this no longer has any value. We'll just throw it out.
Yeah, it is funny because, I think the big thing, even for people that aren't into sports, that they know about is ABC originated Monday Night Football. And it was actually a big controversy when Disney decided to move Monday Night Football to ESPN. And that kind of was the beginning of the end of ABC Sports because that was their big thing. That was like their big innovation too, was that they were showing football on Monday nights. And so when they threw it over to ESPN, that was pretty controversial and basically killed ABC Sports. And it's kind of funny how it's kind of full circle, where now I think Disney's seen the value of having some sporting events on free TV. And they're like, oh, well, we have that ABC network. Let's put some ESPN stuff on ABC. So it goes like, full circle. They're right back where they started.
Yeah, that is kind of crazy and interesting. So I don't know. Bobby's has some additional clarification in some of his comments here. He just says, well, ABC Audio is using the ABC Sports Radio brand. And he says, as I was stating, I meant to type Hearst's, obviously referring to the Hearst company, I believe is what it's called. Silly typo, laugh out loud. And he says, speaking of MNF, I understand it would return to ABC after next year, after 15 seasons on ESPN.
I had not heard that. That would be interesting if Monday Night Football came back to free TV. The one that really gets me is that the college football championship is not on ABC. That really irks the heck out of me. I don't understand that. I mean, I guess they make more money somehow that way, but to me, it's like the national championship should be available to everybody the way the Super Bowl is, and I don't even watch the Super Bowl, but it's the Super Bowl is a big event, right? People have Super Bowl parties, and that's like the only football game they watch the entire year. Well, unfortunately, you can't really do that with the college championship because it's behind a paywall. So I think, to me, I wish that they would do that, but that'd be interesting if ABC ever got Monday Night Football back. That would be interesting.
Most definitely. So I do want to just mention it just briefly. Eric and I discussed, Chadwick Boseman's passing, the actor who played Black Panther. He's been in a bunch of different films and everything. We're not omitting it on purpose per se. It's just we felt like that it's received so much coverage. We would imagine most people are already aware of his passing. Obviously our condolences go to his family and friends. And there's a lot of articles circulating the internet about, how Marvel's going to move forward with Black Panther. I was shocked that he filmed so many films with basically stage 4 colon cancer. That was kind of a huge shock that so many of the Marvel films that he had made, he was, undergoing treatment and had been, suffering with that. So it's not an intentional omission. It's just we feel like that it's most people have covered it, and that most people would be aware. But I didn't want to go through the whole episode without at least briefly mentioning it. So, okay, cool. Are we good to segue over into Streaming Wars?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do it.
Cool. All right. We'll set this up real quick. So here in the Streaming Wars segment, we talk about anything that we find interesting happening in the world of the streaming wars that we think you, our dear valued viewer, you, our dear valued listener, will find interesting. Maybe asking yourself, streaming wars, are we talking about, rivers and streams? What kind of streaming are we talking about? Well, obviously we're talking about streaming video. Specifically, we're talking about all those various services that are fighting for your hard-earned money right now. things such as Hulu, things such as Disney Plus, things such as HBO Max. All these interesting different services, all these amazing varieties, as well as a lot of the free services, whether you want to talk about Pluto TV, whether you want to talk about Tubi, and a lot of other things that we don't talk about anymore, like the Peacock and Quibi. But anyhow, all the amazing options, all the cool different ways that you can watch and enjoy and consume video content. This is what we mean by the streaming wars. So tell me, Eric, what do you have up first for this week's segment of the streaming wars?
Well, as I mentioned, I was going to tie this into Disney. So I have an article here, actually from Market Watch. Let me cue it up here. And it's funny because this article actually talks about pretty much all of the big heavy hitters in the streaming wars. So this is an opinion piece, and it says, "Is Mulan worth $30? The answer and other streaming picks for September 2020." Now, earlier I was talking about my problem with ESPN Plus. So I think you know where I'm going to go with this. Okay. Obviously, to me, Disney is copying their own model, which I think is a very poor model, which is this idea of you paying some sort of base price for a subscription service that is supposed to provide you content. And now on top of that, they're going to be putting like a straight, VOD service on top of that. And the big question in my mind, and I mentioned this the last time we talked about this, and we talked about this pretty recently. If this works, I think all of you folks who decide to do this, if this works, you literally just like shot yourself in the foot. And the reason I'm saying that is because if this works, this is exactly what Disney Plus is going to become. And you're going to see this with more and more content, and less content is going to be available, especially the premium new content we're talking about. That's going to be less and less of that is going to be available with your base subscription service. And it's going to be more about these premiums. And I think this is a really, really good question to be asking, is whether this is worth it. And I don't think it's just a matter of, is it worth $30? Because my point is, this is not going to be the first time Disney does this. They already do this on ESPN Plus with UFC. Like I've said it a million times, ESPN Plus right now, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the biggest ripoffs in the world. Now, granted, ESPN Plus has greater value in today's market than it did just a few months ago before the pandemic started to really hit and we had all these shutdowns, because for a while, nobody had live sports, right? And you could go on ESPN Plus and you could watch, old games of a lot of your favorite sports. So in that sense, for a lot of people, it might have been working just as well as the regular ESPN or any of their competitors. CBS has this. By the way, that's a big thing for CBS. This article talks about that in this article, as they're breaking down all the different like heavy hitters coming up for the streaming quote unquote giants, the very last one they talk about at the end of this article actually is CBS All Access. And CBS All Access, for his little blurb on them, he doesn't talk about Lower Decks. He doesn't talk about Star Trek. Lower Decks is out already. Granted, this is supposed to be about stuff that's coming out, but he doesn't talk about Star Trek or Lower Decks. For CBS All Access, he talks about live sports. That CBS All Access in September is going to get NFL on September 13th, because the NFL is going to start playing again. And they're going to get a new season of the UEFA Champions League soccer, which is a big thing they've been pushing on CBS All Access. I know this because I've been watching Lower Decks on it. So these are the big things that they're saying that they're going to be, using to get people into CBS All Access. It's all about the sports. But going back to this Mulan thing, I see a huge parallel between what they're trying to do with Mulan and what they've been doing with ESPN Plus, and I think the consumer is really going to lose out on this.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not a fan of the price tag, at the end of the day, as far as the Mulan angle is talking about. I just don't like the price tag. I'm not willing to pay that. Not for Mulan anyway.
I think Mulan will just be the beginning. If this works, you're going to see all sorts of other content that's going to come out like this. Like, you know, so if you liked Hamilton and you were happy that Hamilton came out on the you know, as part of Disney Plus, well, guess what? The next time they do something like that, they're going to slap some other price on it. It's going to be in addition to your subscription fee, guaranteed, if this works.
Well, and see, that's unfortunate because I feel like that the subscription service in my mind should be enough. We shouldn't be continually tacking all these random things on. But you're right. It's going to depend upon where people's, you know, pain or tolerance level is for a lot of this. And at one point, people just decide not to go, not to watch, not to support, you know, because of sort of, in my mind anyway, at times, a lack of real foresight and thought about how what they're doing is going to impact basically everyone else. So, yeah. That's my opinion.
We'll see. And this article actually does have a pretty good breakdown where they go through all the major players and what it is that they're offering. They break down the prices and kind of like are basically saying, you know, is it worth it? And he's giving his little blurb. And I will say, like, when he gets all the way down to CBS All Access, again, what's funny is he's kind of like, yeah, they're totally not worth it. He also does a funny thing about Quibi. Is Quibi? He says, like, who's Quibi for? And it says unknown. Perhaps people who like YouTube videos but would rather pay for them. We've beaten up on Quibi quite a bit on this show, so I thought I would mention that as well.
Well, that's an interesting angle. For people who like YouTube videos but would rather pay for them. Cool.
Got a hiccup in the stream there.
Yeah. Are we good to... I have something up here if you wouldn't mind sharing it on. I don't have a lot for this episode's Streaming Wars, but this is my main one I wanted to talk about. This is coming from the AV Club. This is by Britt Hayes, and it says, The New Mutants will stream on HBO Max first, in case you were wondering. So let's stop and think about that for a moment. Okay? Let's stop and think. Let's read the headline again. The New Mutants will stream on HBO Max first, in case you were wondering. So, got a picture here. Again, very excited about Magic. Really excited to see her live action. It says, it actually finally happened. The New Mutants arrived in some theaters last weekend, approximately 3 years after the production began on the final film in Fox's X-Men universe. After enduring repeated delays, release date changes, having its parent studio acquired by Disney, and a global pandemic that forced the shutdown of movie theaters, Josh Boone's horror-inspired comic book film was put out of its misery with a $7 million opening weekend and a plethora of negative reviews. And honestly, it could have done much worse. On the other hand, this tweet from co-star Maisie Williams suggests the New Mutants has yet to truly suffer its final indignity. A girl spills the tea, a girl has no allegiance. I don't know what that means. Anyhow, now it would stand to reason that since the film is official property of Disney, that the New Mutants would make its streaming debut on Hulu. Seems logical, right? Which the company has been using as a repository for its more adult-friendly content, as evidenced by the radical anti-butt stance taken by Disney Plus. But a report from the Wrap reveals that the New Mutants will actually debut first on HBO Max. And the reason is probably along the lines of what you're assuming. HBO and Fox have a contractual agreement that grants the former first-run TV rights to the latter film's releases. That deal doesn't expire until, wait for it, 2022, which means the New Mutants, like Deadpool and Dark Phoenix before it, will eventually premiere on HBO and HBO Max. So there's that. I just found this really interesting. We've talked about this before, about this weird content problem and all these just strange things with all these previously existing deals and how it's affecting all the various streaming services in very unusual ways. And this is a perfectly good example of that. Part of the reason supposedly they couldn't even release New Mutants originally on VOD in the first place is because of the fact that apparently in someone's contract, I don't know if it's the directors, I don't know if it's the movie studios or who, but apparently because of a previously established contractual agreement, it had to have a theatrical release. It had to have a theatrical release. No ifs, ands, nor buts about it. And now it finds out that they can't even put it on basically a Disney-owned, Disney-controlled streaming service, again, because of previously existing contracts. So once this film that everyone assumes, the last the X-Men franchise, would, be over like on Hulu, since obviously with being a horror movie and R-rated, that it wouldn't obviously be on Disney Plus, but it's really weird to think about it. It's going to debut first actually on HBO Max. Had you heard about this, Eric?
I had not, no, but it actually makes perfect sense to me because we're really talking about the finishing up of old business when we're talking about New Mutants, because it is the end of the Fox X-Men franchise. This is the last installment. It took forever for this movie to come out. So it doesn't surprise me that it's been affected by the fact that its parent company was sold and that there were still, unfinished business with this film. I didn't know this exactly was going to happen, but it doesn't particularly shock me. It does show you, though, why delaying the film so much was a bad idea, and Disney should have just thrown it out there and let it sink or swim early on, regardless of all the problems, because then they probably would be beyond a lot of this stuff. It would have already been on HBO, and they could probably have it on Disney Plus by now, because of all these delays. That's not going to be happening, at least not for a while.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's very, very strange. And then we do have some comments here from Donnie actually in relation to this. He says, the final entry in the 20th Century X-Men movie saga. He says, yes, I am referring to 20th Century Studios. And he says, at Base God 14, the end of the 20th Century Studios X-Men franchise. You are correct, Donnie. This is the swan song for the X-Men. I was very excited to hopefully get a chance to see this movie. It did open in theaters, and I did not go see it just because, stated previously, I'm still a little freaked out by everything. I would have loved to watch it VOD, but apparently because of contractual arrangements, judging by what I'm seeing now, I will not be seeing this until they release the Zack Snyder Justice League cut. So come on, Justice League, because until they get the Zack Snyder Justice League cut out there, I won't be checking this out because it's going to be on HBO Max. So that's where I am. So just so weird the way all this is shaking out. Because there's so much other content that's actually Marvel that's already on Hulu. I mean, if they were to kind of tweak it like what they've done with Disney Plus, it'd be kind of cool to have like a little Marvel section with all the other stuff.
Everything else has been out long enough that it's already gone through its cycle, and those rights have all reverted. It's because they waited so long to put this silly film out. That's why they're going to have to wait. I don't think anybody even had Disney Plus in the equation. Well, I know they didn't, because this was made under 20th Century Fox. So they didn't have, the Disney Plus issue wasn't even a twinkle in their eye. You know what I mean? So nobody was anticipating that. But if Disney had actually gone ahead and gotten this film out, basically as soon as they made the acquisition, and they probably would have made more money, for one thing, because more theaters were open. And by this time, it probably would have gone through all of its cycles, through the theaters, through its time on HBO, and probably would never even be on HBO Max, because HBO Max just barely came out. And, now it would be on Disney Plus. They dragged their feet. They deserve what happened to them,
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. So that was pretty much my one and only story for Streaming Wars, this segment. But I just thought it was oddly appropriate because we've talked about how all this weirdness that's going on with who has the rights to what, and content being here for a little while and then jumping across the street because of some old contract that still exists. And it's weird. It's weird. It makes the Streaming Wars even more unusual in my mind, anyway.
You know,
Very cool.
that's it's one of those things. I think a lot of people when they look at something like this, they scratch their head. And again, I just have to say that if Disney had just been a little bit quicker, like taken maybe 2 years instead of 3 to get this film out, this wouldn't even be a story. It's just it would already have gone through everything, and it would be on Disney Plus right now or Hulu. Well, actually, they are putting all the
Right.
Fox stuff. I have noticed they're putting all the Fox stuff on Disney Plus, and it is interesting. I have heard rumors, and I think this is a terrible move if Disney does this. I've heard rumors that Disney Plus wants to have like an adult tab for more adult films, and I don't know. I don't think of the Fox films necessarily in that regard. I know Logan's not on there as far as I know, and that's the only one that's rated R. But I think that's a really bad move on Disney's part, and them truly not even understanding their own brand if they do something like that. I think the adult stuff should be on Hulu. That makes perfect sense to me. That's exactly where I would put it, and I would use it for that. If they decide to make like an adult tab on Disney Plus, I think they're gonna end up doing irreversible damage to their brand.
Yeah, I could see where that would definitely be a problem for them. So, tell me, Eric, what else do you have for streaming wars this week?
Well, that was it. It's just one and done when it comes to streaming wars. Actually, we have a pretty good segue here into our next main topic with some things that Donnie's talking about. He actually said something that I find a little bit controversial, and I'll see if you find it controversial as well, Dave. So he has a little thread here, and he says, I am fine with Dark Horse Comics holding comic book publishing rights for the Orville instead of Marvel, corporate sibling to Disney 20th Television, which produces the Orville. And I understand the connection there, that obviously Fox was producing the show. Now that's part of Disney. And, he thinks it's okay for Dark Horse to be publishing it rather than Marvel taking it over. He says, yet, I wish Marvel would have taken over comic book publishing rights for another 20th television property. I keep saying, want to say 20th Century Fox. 20th television property, The Simpsons. And he says a few other TV properties as well. Dave, I don't know. What do you think about that? You not a liker of it's Bongo Comics, right? Are you not are you against them or what? Should Marvel be taking over The Simpsons?
Well, no, I don't think Marvel should be taking over The Simpsons, at least not in comic book publishing form anyway, because I'm not sure The Simpsons warrants being published in comic books right now. But that's just my personal opinion. Huh?
The Simpsons have been continuously published, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, they have been, but I'm just... Huh?
Bongo Comics, right? They're the ones who do
Yeah.
The Simpsons, and then they've been in continuous publication for years, haven't they?
Yeah, they have been. Again, just my opinion. I have a story for why, but I can't. I can tell you off the air.
Are you a Bongo hater? That's what the controversy is to me, because I used to see Bongo every year at San Diego, and I thought those guys were great. I loved the artwork, and I thought that they did some really great work. I haven't purchased a Simpsons comic book in a very long time, but I do have some in my collection, and I always thought they did a great job. So that's why I thought that was controversial, and that he would rather see Marvel publishing their books rather than Bongo.
Yeah, and but it's weird too, because Donnie brings up a good point, because in relation to just how it's unusual, because Dark Horse is, for the longest time, probably their most successful property that they had that they were publishing comics for was Star Wars.
Right.
And then their next two most successful brands they had that they were publishing comic books for was the long-running version of Predator they were doing, as well as the long-running version of Aliens, and of course eventually Aliens versus Predator. Like, those were three of their most successful sort of brands that they were publishing comics for. And then it's so weird and so unfortunate that in the midst of everything that's happened, that Marvel took back the Star Wars comics, right? Now they're in the process of taking back Predator and Aliens as well. So it's a weird cyclical thing, and it's kind of ironic that Dark Horse is doing, for example, the Orville comic, when in reality it's a production that's either co-produced or produced or at least partially owned, obviously by whatever remains of 20th Century. So very interesting.
Yeah, I was just looking that I guess it said at San Diego Comic-Con in July 2018, Bongo said that they would be shutting down in October. And it says Simpsons Comics 245 was the final issue released by Bongo. So that's why. So I'm just so out of it as far as where that situation was. That's why at first I was all like, Donnie, what are you talking about? But it's Bongo doesn't make the Simpsons comics anymore, and I guess I don't. Is nobody's making them? Is there no Simpson comic now? Is that what the deal is?
Yeah, I think if Bongo's not currently publishing them, I don't think there is one.
Yeah, that's crazy. So Donnie, then that does make sense. You're that does make a lot of sense to me that they would look to maybe Marvel publishing the Simpsons comic books. To me, that would be a no-brainer. If it's not being published and Bongo's gone, why wouldn't Marvel be making Simpsons comics? Weird.
Yeah, that would tend to It follows the through line. It makes sense. But yeah, no, I have no idea why either. I just thought it was weird because I hadn't considered that at all when we had discussed, taking a look at the Orville for this episode. I had not even considered the weird connections and sort of the unusual nature of, Dark Horse having this property, you know what I mean? Whereas their other more successful franchises, they no longer have the ability to publish anymore. So it's a strange thing. Definitely a strange thing.
And a great segue into our next main topic, because we can actually talk about this, whether we think Dark Horse is actually worthy of the mantle.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So yes, we're talking about the Orville comic book, the new series that actually launched. They have a series that actually predates this. It's supposed to be like a series like 1.5. I think I'd heard that this one's supposed to be considered like taking place within, two sort of season 2.5 was my understanding. I may have that slightly confused.
No, it's supposed to be like 2.5. That's my understanding.
Okay, there you go. So here we have this really great cover. I really, really like this cover. This is by the Orville series artist David Cabeza. I'm gonna say. Apologies if I'm saying it wrong. Really great cover, an homage to actually Jerome Moore's version of a very similar cover that was actually used for Star Trek. The Star Trek comic that at the time was being published over at DC Comics. That image of the Enterprise with the light rays and everything behind it's pretty iconic and pretty classic in my mind anyway. But yeah, they're sort of taking inspiration from that, and it's really cool. I think it looks really good. So since we're talking about a comic book, this is a new release comic. Well, we should probably talk spoilers, do a little bit of generalities, but not get too deep into the weeds on this in case some person is well, we don't want to ruin it for them necessarily. We may have a little spoiler conversation here, and obviously we'll mention that before we get into spoilers. We'll put the banner up so that if we're talking about anything and you haven't read it and you want to read it, we obviously don't want to ruin it. So
and this came out today. This book came out today. That's important to mention to people because some people might be like, "What are they talking about?" This is a new Orville comic book that came out today.
Yes, it came out today. Where I read it digitally. Eric actually read it in print. And it's weird too because Eric had an easier time getting his comic than I did, and I'll talk about just why that was just briefly. So for some weird reason that I still don't understand, I was trying to log into my Comixology account. I buy all my comics through Comixology. I was trying to log into my Comixology account so I could download this particular book. I took it, put it in my shopping cart, clicked the buy, and it kept telling me, update your information, update your information, update your information. All kinds of just weird problems. And then eventually I somehow got my account locked out, trying to basically update the card, trying to update the payment info. I tried a bunch of other things, trying to somehow get access to it. Maybe I tried too many times. I don't know what it was. But basically, I got locked out of my account. So I ended up having to actually go in and set up a new account with new information just so I could actually download and read the comics. So I had a hell of a time trying to get this. And again, I was reading digitally on Comixology. You think that would be simpler, faster, cheaper, easier, better. But in this case, it was not. And I still don't understand how I got my account locked out still. So maybe eventually the tech support people will respond and we'll find out why. So tell me, Eric, what was your experience actually just buying a print copy of the Orville comic launch day?
Well, obviously, I got a laugh out of the irony of the situation. For folks that don't know, I'm a physical guy. I do not like reading comics digitally. It's just not comfortable for me. I like to have physical copies of the book. I'm a big supporter of physical copies when it comes to comics and things like that. And in this particular situation, I had called Samurai Comics. They're the big sort of local comic books chain in my area. I want to give them sort of a shout out there. This is, you can see their logo. It's very cool, little samurai guy there. And I went ahead and just called them up the week before the book came out. And I have my physical copy here, as you can see. I have my physical copy. And what I did was I called Samurai Comics. And I told them that I was interested in this book, that it was coming out next week. They said, hey, we should have enough copies that we will put one aside for you. We will put one aside for you. I went in today and they gave me my book. I paid for it. And they told me also that I'm all set for the next one because this is a two-parter. And they got me all set up. So when the next one comes out, I will get a copy of that as well. It was very smooth. I didn't have to pay anything up front, which was really nice too. I just had to pay, basically when I got there. It was a very good experience. And for the folks that are not aware, Samurai Comics, which they have a location in Mesa, Arizona, one in Phoenix, Arizona, another one in Glendale, Arizona. They also have online comics. While the pandemic was going on in full force and when they had to close, when all of our retail places were closed here in Arizona, I was able to actually order a couple books from Samurai via their website. So there's kind of the best of both worlds there, where you have the ability to go online and order a book, as well as, go into the store now and buy a book. So I can't recommend them enough. I just think it's funny because the big thing about digital comics in my mind is, hey, much easier to get them, much more timely. You're always going to get them before the physical guy. Well, at this time, the physical guy won.
That's true. That's very, very true.
To read it first. It was within minutes, but I actually did get to read it like 20 minutes before Dave did. So,
yeah. So again, we're talking about the Orville launch day. This is part 1 of 2. So we'll just talk about it just in generalities, our initial impressions, and then we'll kind of get into the weeds for a little bit and get more into the nitty gritty about what's happening. So. My initial impression with this is that I enjoyed it. I liked it. I didn't love it. And the reason I didn't love it is because I felt like that it has all the beats of an episode of the Orville, which is good. But in a weird way too, it has some of the same faults that as well. It's just a weird thing. So my initial impressions was I enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting, but I felt like not a lot happened. It's obviously a lot of setup. They're setting up events that are hopefully going to pay off in the second one. And I'm excited to read the second one. But like I said, it's like I liked it. I enjoyed it. The writer who wrote this, I know he's like one of the producers on Orville.
One of the producers of the Orville, yes.
Yeah. Like the characters sound.
David A. Goodman.
Yeah. If you listen to it, the characters, not listen to it. How do I put this? Reading this book, I found it interesting because I could hear their voices. The art is really solid. I really, really like the art. And the art coupled with the dialogue, the way that they set the scenes up, it very much was like an Orville episode, in a graphic novel format. And I thought that was really cool, the way that they put that together. Um, and it felt like it rang true to the Orville. So, like I said, it's a big setup. I felt like that because it was a big setup. I felt like that we didn't have a lot going on, sort of story wise. Maybe it's just because it is a setup. But I tend to remember back in the day that comics used to do a better job of kind of paying off and setting up a cliffhanger than some of the current comics. It seems like that we've covered here on the show. To me, this almost in a weird way, not in a bad way, because I'm not picking on it too much, but it kind of reminded me of some of the Orville, the Picard comics that we read, Eric, because the Picard comics had a similar problem too, where it was sort of like it would set something up, but it would take forever to kind of set it up. And then at the end of the day, it didn't feel like there was much of a payoff. So what were your initial impressions of the Orville launch day part 1 of 2?
Well, you pretty much said it all. So there's not much else I can say other than to reiterate a lot of your points. But kind of going back a little bit, as far as like what people, there's always a difficulty when you have a television show or a movie when it's adapted as a comic book, if you fell in love with the television or the movie first. And the issue has to do a lot of times with, there are certain elements that you just cannot duplicate within a book that you have in a series. Donnie has an interesting comment here where he talks about, that he loves the Orville, and that what he loves about the Orville is the theme song, the tune, composed by Bruce. Is it Broughton? I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. That he loves the theme of Orville. Now, yeah. if you can play that in your head, Donnie, then you're going to be fine. But a lot of us, like myself, I'll be honest, I can't remember the theme song of the Orville straight up in my head. So I don't get that experience when I'm reading the book. It's one of those things that it's kind of lacking, that you can't really translate when you're doing a comic book. And the other issue that I had that Dave didn't really mention was because of timing. In fact, I remember going to panels about this at San Diego Comic-Con, and they would talk about some of the issues with humor comics. And one of the issues with humor comics is all about timing, because people read at different speeds. So it's almost impossible to get that timing that's so important in comedy correct in a comic book. In a comic strip, it's a lot easier because comic strips are so short. So basically, a comic strip in a lot of ways is usually just sort of the setup and the punchline, and it's just like a one-line joke, for lack of a better term. When you have a full comic book that's 22, 24 pages, I'm not sure exactly how long this is. It's between that amount, 22, 20, 24. It's got that standard comic book format. And this is a comic book, I would say. I wouldn't call it a graphic novel. I would say this is a comic book. This is a floppy. It's pretty short. But it's when it comes to humor in that form, if you aren't able to do what Dave was saying and really kind of get into the headspace of, how the actors are and how they speak, my familiarity with the Orville is much less than Dave's. I never watched the first season. In fact, I've been waiting to watch it because I want to review it on this show when we get closer to the actual air date of this third season of the Orville, because I'd be curious to know whether I like it at all. Because I came in mid-season 2, and almost universally, everyone, even hardcore Orville fans, will tell me, yeah, that's when it really started to get good. So, you may not like the beginning of season 2. You may not like season 1. I'm interested to find that out for myself personally at some point, because I loved what I saw, but there's so much I didn't see, and there's so much I don't know. Even as a person who does consider themselves an Orville fan, again, because of the episodes I have seen, I really, really enjoyed. And I've also enjoyed my interaction with the fans of the Orville. One of our best friends in terms of broadcasting is Orville Nation, PJ from Orville Nation. And it's just awesome doing stuff with him. And when he comments and things like that, or we get an opportunity to comment on his show. And I've really enjoyed that. But a lot of those things, again, for me, I can't really do in my head because I'm not familiar enough with it to be able to do that, to like speak in their voices, all that stuff. And I could tell, like, I knew what the jokes were. I was like, yeah, that's a joke. But because, again, I think it has to do with the way people read things. And because you don't have that natural timing in your head, you don't necessarily know that the joke is coming. You're certainly not going to deliver it in your head the way that the actors do, unless you really are into these actors and you really know them, as far as how they work. And I don't. It can fall flat a little bit. That's not to say that it's not funny. It's just to say that that's one of the issues that I see when it comes to trying to adapt something like the Orville into a comic book. I think that's a challenge with any adaptation when it comes to doing a comic book, or even a lot of times doing a novel or anything like that. Sometimes that can be the challenge, especially I think when someone is a more casual fan. I think it becomes more of a problem, because I liked what you said, Dave, about how you can speak in the actors' voices in your head. I'm not quite there where I can do that. Like, I'm not familiar enough with the Orville where I can quite do that. You know what I mean? So it makes it a little bit more challenging to deal with it, as the Orville, Is your mic on, Dave, or do we lose a connection or something?
No, lose the connection. I was just trying to think of how to kind of sum it up. I mean, like I said, I liked it, and like I said, for me, I could hear the voices. I thought the writing was good because all the characters sound true. Sometimes with these kind of tie-in comics and stuff, depending upon who's writing them, like the art looks good, but it doesn't necessarily sound. Like when you're reading it, it's not like you can hear the voices. Like I could hear the voices in my head when I was reading it, the various actors. It rang very true. But like you had said and I had said, it's definitely very much to the comic. And I'm very curious to see what they're going to do with the second issue. So.
The bottom line is there's not a lot that happens in this issue.
Yeah,
not a lot actually happens. It is a setup book.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, maybe if we do the second, do we want to get in? I don't think we should get into spoilers with this since it just came out. Eric, would you agree?
Yeah, and I don't think there's a lot to spoil. I'll be honest with you. I think we can put a little spoiler warning and just talk about what's going on, because there isn't a whole lot to actually spoil.
Right.
The basically for people that might be on the fence about whether they want to read this or not. If you're an Orville fan, I think that it's definitely worth taking a look at. But the basic setup of this is that essentially and by the way, I remember I read one of the previews previously, and they mentioned that part of this has to do with a planet that has broken away from the planetary union, right? And so there's an issue where there's a sort of a kind of a mystery about why this planet suddenly decided to abandon the union, and nobody really knows why. And there's speculation about it, about what it is that happened, but nobody actually knows the real answer. And you get an indication in this episode. I could say episode. Why not? In this episode of the Orville, you get an indication of what that might have been that happened, and it does seem to kind of parallel some things that people are talking about now politically. And by the end of the book, you're still not quite sure what's going on, but you get a little bit of indication of what happened, of why this particular planet broke away. And I think that's about as much as you can say without spoiling anything.
Right. Yeah. And then, like I said, the art's really good. I really like the art. I thought the colors were really great. I'd said before that Michael Atia, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right or not, is a fantastic colorist. He did a great job on this issue, by the way. The art on this I thought was really, really good. And just to echo, just real quickly, something that Donnie had said, well, just to call out something, he had mentioned before that he really likes the theme, which is by Bruce Broughton. He said I did pronounce his surname correctly. That's nice to know. And I was going to mention, too, I really like Bruce Broughton's work. I quite like the theme song from Young Sherlock Holmes. That's was done by Bruce Broughton, and I also love his work that he did on actually the Lost in Space soundtrack. Was the film that actually came out. I think it was the '90s. The one that had oh darn, the actor who played Joey and Friends in it. He played the pilot. Well, anyhow, long story short, the one from the '90s. I love the design work on that movie a lot. I think I've showed the Lost in Space robot on the show before, but I really, really love the work that actually he did actually with the score actually for that Lost in Space movie. That score is really, really good. That's also by the same gentleman. So just wanted to call that out because his
Matt LeBlanc.
There you go, Matt LeBlanc. Yeah. Pilot Don West, I think it was. Man, the design work on that movie is good, and the music is really great too. So just want to call that out. That's the same gentleman. Does really, really good work. I'm curious to see what they do with the next issue. That sometimes that's the most important thing with a comic. And I agree with Eric. I think if you are a fan of the Orville, I think this is definitely worth checking out. I think it's worth having your collection of it if you're an Orville fan, just for this really great cover here. Of course, homaging, again, like I said, the cover by Jerome Moore from the DC Star Trek series. This is a really, really cool cover. I really, really like the cover. So
I wanted to mention they have this neat little thing that's kind of like an homage to the old comic authority things, but what it says is, our comeback will be bigger than our setback. And for those of you folks that were hearing all these rumors about the Orville being canceled, I think that's a direct reference to those false rumors.
Well, there you go. There you go.
I like that. Our comeback will be bigger than our setback.
Yeah,
because I know this is the only new material we have for the Orville right now because the production itself has been bogged down. So it is nice that they can do some comic books. In fact, I wish they were doing more in a lot of ways, that they were able to produce more of these books, but for whatever reason, they haven't been able to. So,
and I did notice too that they have I think it's a season 1.5 because they did a series before this, and they've collected it together in a trade. So there is a season 1.5 for those who are the Orville fans who may have missed it. And I noticed that Comixology had actually that collection actually for sale. I think so. If people are interested in checking it out, you can actually pick up the 1.5 collection for not too much more than you would actually pay for this new issue. So if you're interested in checking those out, and if you like digital comics, like I said, Comixology has that for sale. So that's kind of cool if you want to check that out. And like I said, it's a quality comic. But the only downside, I think, is that it's a lot of setup. But along those same lines, the thing that's kind of neat is because the art is solid, because the colors are good, because the writing is on point, everyone looks the way they're supposed to look. And I feel like that they've done such a good job capturing the Orville in comic book form. Like I said, for me, I can hear the actual actors' voices when I'm reading the dialogue. So that's always good when it's immersive enough that you feel like that it does capture the experience of watching or a movie or watching a TV show, that it's so kind of in line. There's been other comics like stuff like that where I felt like that it didn't work as well, and it doesn't feel right when you're reading it, but this does.
Yeah, I think obviously one thing that a lot of hardcore fans will like as well, as you can see from the cover, that they were able to use the likenesses of all the different actors. And I think that's important to a lot of people, especially people who really like the Orville. You probably don't want to see them as sort of, generic, stock people. You want to see the likenesses of the actors. And you do have that in this book.
And that's kind of a weird thing too, because, for example, like I've worked on certain properties, and specifically, I think trading cards are probably the biggest example of that. But where you work on a property and they go, well, we want it to look like Brandon Routh. It just can't look like Brandon Routh, And I'm talking about Arrow. I worked on some sketch cards for a couple seasons of Arrow for Cryptozoic, and it was always so weird because you always get these directives, and they'll say it's like it should look like Stephen Amell as Arrow, but not look like Stephen Amell as Arrow. So that's what I'm talking about, because you find yourself in this weird quandary where it's like, yeah, that's mostly right, but it still feels slightly off. And the thing that's really cool about this is because they're able to use likenesses, and because the art team does such a great job. I mean, you can tell from this cover, you recognize everyone, and you know what you're getting into, which is really cool. That's an important thing. Eric's right. That's a very, very important thing, especially for a comic that either does or doesn't directly tie into something. At least it encompasses or captures as much as they can the experience of hopefully that thing that you like or that thing that you love. So
I will say this, having this discussion, it kind of makes me realize that maybe one of the reasons we don't get more Orville comics is because of that, because they do have to pay some sort of fee for the likenesses. I know that becomes a very sticky issue sometimes. And it does kind of make me think that the Orville, the folks at the Orville should actually look at maybe doing an actual spinoff in the comics where they don't have to deal with that kind of baggage. And then also you don't necessarily have to be all that familiar with the show or anything like that, where it's just kind of like its own thing, like another ship in the Planetary Union. I would definitely pitch that if I had the opportunity to do so, because I think that kind of gets rid of a lot of those issues.
I was going to say it flies in the face of sometimes what I talk about with Star Trek, that, I want them to be on a Starfleet vessel and in Starfleet uniforms. But are you familiar with Peter David's New Earth run that he did in the Star Trek novels?
No, I'm not.
It's some really cool stuff. And you were talking about a sort of a spinoff, kind of title for the Orville. I think if someone was to take the concept of the Star Trek New Earth series that Peter David had developed, maybe even Peter David himself, and then do, sort of a spoofy send off of that, you know what I mean, as a sister title, a spinoff title for the Orville, I think that would be an interesting way to approach it, because you wouldn't necessarily tread on the same material that the Orville would be doing in season 3, but you could still hint upon a lot of similar sort of Trek-like themes and have a lot of the sort of those trappings and adventure and everything. It would be an interesting way to approach a spinoff comic, I think. So
that's another limitation that comics often have when they do adaptations, is that they have to be careful about not treading on whatever is going to be happening in season 3, like in this instance. So sometimes that can kind of limit the storytelling quite a bit as well. So we'll see. I hope as we kind of mentioned, this is a lot of setup. There's not like a whole lot that happens in this issue. So hopefully in part 2 there is more. But I do think it would be kind of a neat idea if they did like another ship or something like that, and then they could kind of just do their own thing and not have to worry about any of that stuff.
Definitely, and I'll pitch it yet again. I still think it would be fun to do the Star Trek early voyages that actually focused on Captain Christopher Pike, that actually Marvel published actually in the late 90s, early 2000s. I really, really liked that series. And it's interesting too. It's a very curious series too, because it has kind of those similar sort of things where it's like, it kind of looks like them, but doesn't exactly look like them, and it's interesting because it's kind of touching on stuff that supposedly happened, but it didn't happen. I don't know. It's just an interesting series. I still think it'd be fun to talk about some of those on the show. So if that's good, are we good to go ahead and go to the outro?
Yeah, I think we're good to go.
Okay, very cool. All right, so I want to thank you for hopefully watching or listening to this episode of Retro Rogues Live. Again, my name is Dave Beatty. I've been one of your hosts. You can see some of the fun things I'm working on, as well as hopefully potentially purchase a t-shirt to help support what we're doing here at the Retro Rogues Live over at kirbytees.com. That's KIRBYTS.com. Love for you to go there and check that out and see all the fun designs. We have tie-dyes over there, all kinds of fun things. There'll be some new custom options available very soon, as well as the first parody t-shirt for Star Dogs, which is a sort of a Star Wars parody. Definitely go check those out over there at KirbyTees.com. I want to thank my co-host, Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks where they can learn more about you on the interwebs.
I'm most active on Twitter, and that's at BaseGod14, at BASSGOD14. That's also the official YouTube for the Retro Rogues. That's also the official Twitch for Retro Rogues. But again, the easiest way to usually contact me is on Twitter because my DMs are always open. But I'll also respond to comments and things like that. So if you comment on the YouTube or the Twitch or what have you, I'm more than happy to respond to that stuff as well. And we are definitely always looking for suggestions on things to check out, things to look at, things that you're interested in. And maybe you just want to hear our take, or maybe you just want to contribute as a member of the Rogues Gallery and talk about whatever it is that you're interested in, and just have somebody to bounce your ideas off of. So we're always here for that. And Bobby Chambers said, thanks for the show. Till next week. And Bobby, we appreciate you contributing to the show and commenting. Jane also said, great show, guys. And then Donnie had said something in the chat earlier. He said, my introduction to John Williams was his NBC nightly news theme tune, The Mission. My mock-up recreation of that is on my SoundCloud page. Very cool, Donnie. And with that, we will leave our viewers with the